So should I call the meeting to order?
Whenever you guys are ready.
Okay, well, it's now 7 o'clock by my computer, so let's call the meeting to order. I so do that. And can we please have a call of the roll?
Yes, Commissioner Arata, Commissioner Glass, Commissioner Garcia,
Here.
Commissioner Funabashi,
Here.
Commissioner Bajaj,
Bajaj, yeah, thank you. Here.
thank you. Vice Chairman
Here.
and Chair Simpson.
I am here. And next item on the agenda is we salute the flag. Do we share a flag on the screen, or do we just, oh, there we go. Perfect. So I pledge allegiance
To the flag
of the
of the
United
United States of America
and to
and
the
to the republic for
that
which it stands,
one
one
nation,
nation, under God,
indivisible,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
all. Thank you very much. Our sounds seem to come in at a different speed there, depending on I don't know what. But okay, so the next item on the agenda is to approve the order of the agenda. I see a motion to do that.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor, can we just do a voice vote, or do you want to do a roll call on this? We can just do a voice vote, can't we? On approval of the agenda.
I think for this one, yes.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Don't hear any opposed. Next on the item, next item is the blue folder items. Are there any items in the blue folder?
There are no blue folder items.
Okay. That means that we then move to the consent calendar. And the items on the consent calendar for consideration are the affidavit of posting, meeting minutes from the last meeting, and a motion to receive and file the city's strategic plan update of the city council meeting on March 15th, 2022. Those are the items. They're not, I'm sorry, they aren't motions. They're the items for consideration. Does anyone wish to pull any of those items off the consent calendar, or can we just act on the consent calendar? Anything want to be pulled and discussed separately? Seeing none, I then suggest that we, someone make a motion to accept the consent calendar, please.
Make a motion.
Mr. Glass makes the motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Commissioner Bajaj seconds. And now the consent calendar has passed, and it's time at this point to move on to public participation on non-agenda.
Excuse me, Chair Simpson.
Yes.
I believe you had a motion in a second, but I think we do need a voice vote on this one.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just, yeah, we do need a vote.
And you may need to check for any public wishing to speak on this.
Oh, okay. Let me do that first. Is there anyone wishing to speak to items on the consent calendar?
Lauren, do we have anybody on E5? No. Okay.
Okay, so then I guess we've had the motion made and seconded, and now it would be appropriate to call for a vote. And again, I think we can do this as a voice vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Pardon me, sir.
Aye.
Sorry, before you do, we've been asked to take a voice vote on the consent calendar items, if you don't mind. I'm not a voice vote, a roll call vote, please.
A roll call on the consent? Okay, fine. Let's do that then, please.
Commissioner Arata,
Aye.
Commissioner Glass,
Aye.
Commissioner Garcia,
Yes.
Commissioner Funabashi,
Yes.
Commissioner Bajaj?
Yeah, Bajaj. Yeah,
Bajaj.
yes.
Vice Chairman
Yes.
and Chair Simpson.
Yes. Okay, so we have passed the consent calendar unanimously, I guess. And so that means that there aren't any excluded consent calendar items in item G. So we now move to item H, which is public participation on non-agenda items. Is there anyone from the public that wants to comment on anything, I guess, that's not on the agenda? Any written communications for non-agenda items?
There is no written communications for non-agenda items.
And no public participation for non-agenda items from what I can see.
No.
Just then that we would move to, we don't have any items continued from the previous agenda that I'm aware of. So we would move to item J, items for discussion prior to action. And I guess J1 would be the first one we would hear from staff on.
Thank you, Chair Simpson. I'll be taking the lead on this one and actually each of the discussion items tonight for your consideration.
Thank you, Andrew.
I'm sorry? But, okay, you can hear me okay. Yeah, great. And member Rod, I just wanted to confirm that was you, your number ending in 416. Oh, no. Not sure if she's trying, what, Lauren, do you recall is it still?
Oh, hello. I'm sorry about that. My mic was muted. Yeah, I'm here, guys. Sorry about that.
Okay, very good. Welcome.
I can't get the video link to work. Thank you.
There's
Nice to
no
have
way
you
you
with
can
us.
get in on your computer for video?
Well, when I hit it, it doesn't do anything. I mean, I was just doing reinstalled it and it won't open. I clicked the link that was sent and let me try this last one she just sent. Yeah, it won't open. I don't know why.
Well, at the phone, at least we can hear you and you can participate. So,
Thank you. My apologies.
Andrew, why don't you go ahead with your presentation, please?
Very good, will do, and I'll be share my screen with your permission. Again, welcome to our meeting tonight. This first item, item J1, is a discussion of the CIP, the Capital Improvement Program implementation process. The nature of this being on the agenda comes from a goal on the strategic plan of the City Council. You may realize the strategic plan took a little bit of a hiatus during COVID, but it's come back and you've had that already in your consent calendar, the recent council action on that. One of the goals listed there is the goal to enhance the delivery of city services, and delivery of capital projects is something that this Public Works Department is responsible for. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about that. There's no strict objective or no specific objective rather on the current strategic plan. But we did want to bring it up for discussion as we move into the budget process this year. And we have had some comments in the past from council and others about the questions about the duration of time it takes to get projects implemented. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit tonight, talk about our processes, just how we're set up in the department, our capacity to take on projects and take input from this commission about ideas for improvement or ideas that might be brought forward during the discussion on budget and future strategic plan items, that kind of thing. So let me move on here to my first slide. The department is responsible for delivery of capital projects. Currently, we've got about 110 projects listed with some kind of funding attached to them in our current budget, our capital improvement budget, part of the city's annual budget. Total value of those projects is about just over $65 million. It's a significant part of the city's budget. The Public Works Department is roughly broken up into two groups, an operations group and an engineering group. And between those two groups and various contracted general contractors, various kinds of contractors and consultants, it's our job to implement the capital improvement program. Here's kind of a big picture overview. I know this is probably hard to read on your screen. You do have it in your materials for tonight in the agenda. It's also available on the city's webpage through the budget document that's there on the webpage. It's just an org chart for the Public Works Department for this year. I've got a cloud around the portion that we call the engineering group. And then the rest of it would be, with the exception of the administrative group at the top, would be our operations divisions for various aspects of the city. Sewers, storm drains, harbor, parks, streets, and the like. With regard to capital projects, we have a couple of big broad categories that we talk about. We have our capital improvements, which are what you would imagine kind of our major projects, street improvements, building improvements, park improvement projects. We have our routine projects at the far right of this chart here, kind of our maintenance operations that are ongoing, fairly regular, that our operations group takes care of. And then somewhere in the middle, we have what we call capital maintenance projects. That's not a formal definition. That's just kind of my way of categorizing. To talk about projects that are capital in nature in terms of their dollar volume and their complexity, but they are also, in a lot of ways, maintenance in that they are not necessarily improving something other than to kind of remake it as if it were new again. For instance, we are doing a project right now to install new coatings on all the railings around the pier. And this is a project that is new in the sense that we're getting new coatings and we'll have a new nice look out there, but not new in the sense that we have pier railings already and we're not changing the design or the shape. We're just simply installing new coatings on them. So that would be an example in my mind of capital maintenance. The differences are shown in the table here. In terms of funding, we address both the capital improvement and the capital maintenance projects in our CIP funding budget, and our routine maintenance is handled through our operations budget. The engineering group typically handles the capital improvement program and shares responsibility with the operations group for the capital maintenance program. The routine maintenance is typically handled by the operations group. When it comes to procurement of services and materials, the capital improvement projects are subject to state public contract code in some cases, our city charter, and a couple of special rules for procurement. Our capital maintenance project list of projects has some of those same restrictions, but there is some interpretation that can be done where there are exceptions, and that's a bit of a cloudy area. Something that we'd like to, as we move forward, get some more clarity on within our legal department and maybe other ways to clear that up in the future. Procurement for regular maintenance materials, trash can liners and paper towels and things like that that we do, or gravel and dirt and those kind of materials. We have a standard city procurement policy that's followed for that. Our capital improvement projects are managed primarily in the engineering department, but the work is actually performed through our consultant partners and general and building contractors, specialty licensed contractors. Our capital maintenance work can include those, but also we have some of our in-house teams doing that work. Since the pier railing project I mentioned, began as a project that was being done by our in-house peer maintenance division. It just became too much work with their other duties and actually some of their limitations due to current understaffing. And so we have turned it into a out to bid type of project, an out of house project. And then our routine maintenance, typically either done by our operations divisions, or in the case of certain specialties, we do a program where we eradicate roots in the sewer system. And so we hire a specialty maintenance contractor to come in and do that kind of thing. Now they are licensed in terms of the herbicides and things that they use, but they're not what we would call a licensed contractor managed by the state of California, at least from the Consumer Affairs Division. And then finally, there's labor issues that are connected to each of these. The state public contract code and labor code have certain requirements for capital projects when you're using outside contractors, and certain elements of even of our consulting firms. For instance, our field workers, field survey teams now are under prevailing wage law, as well as some of our geotechnical engineering technicians that are in the field are also subject to those prevailing wage laws. When we do things in-house or with these non-listed contract specialties, then the prevailing wage rules don't necessarily apply. So lots of differences that we have to consider when we figure out how to procure projects, how to contract for them, who's going to manage them, and how much time it'll take to get them done. Tried to be brief in that chart. There's a lot more detail we can get into at some other time. Speaking of detail, this chart is going to be hard to read, and it's not really meant to show you all the detail. This is a chart we borrowed from Caltrans project manual for how to onboard a consultant to do design work for you. Caltrans being Caltrans, it's complex. They have people who have time to develop charts like this. We don't, so we borrow theirs. What I've asked one of our project managers to do is just annotate this with a timeline, what it takes for us to bring a consultant on board. We model this, or we imitate this model to some degree, not entirely, but we use kind of these same steps. And if you count up the number of weeks there, I got 18 to once we have a project that's has funding approved and is ready for us to go to work on it in our engineering division, to bring on a consultant. And that's if everything goes well. So that has steps like issuing an RFP, getting proposals back in, evaluating the various proposals, making a recommendation, maybe sometimes interviewing the various competitive teams to get further clarification on their proposal. Once we have somebody in mind, then we go back through another part of the process where we negotiate a fee. When we hire a consulting firm, we are not required to pay the lowest lowest cost proposal. And so we typically ask for sealed bid proposals in separate envelopes. So we don't open those until we've decided who our top candidate or candidates are. And then when we get to that point, then we'll open up their bid proposal and begin negotiations for a price. Once we get to that point, we go to our city attorney's office to get a contract written. And there's specifications there we have to follow, get insurance and things like that. And then we bring it to the city council. And if they award that contract, then we get into our first kickoff meetings and get the ball rolling with that consultant. That's typically a 4 to 5 month process. So that's one of the reasons that some projects that you wouldn't think would take that long actually do take some time. This next chart is similar. The difference is this is our in-house chart. This is not a Caltrans effort. This was built by one of my predecessors here. And this is a long list of events as well. If you count the weeks on this one, let's see, I had that number of 12 to 13 weeks, it looked like, from the time a city council has approved the budget and we can start on a project until we can get the project awarded by the city council and get a notice to proceed out to a contractor. So that's 12 to 14 weeks once we have the plans and specs approved. So design work is done, and now we're just in the process of procurement. So again, another 3-month or so process just to get through the system here between when we have something designed and when we need to, when we're able to get the contractor going. That again assumes a lot. It assumes the contractor is ready to go. It assumes that materials are available. It assumes that the right-of-way is secure and all those kinds of things. So we have a number of steps to go through, and this again contributes to the story of why it takes a long time to get anything done. One of the things I want to call your attention to in this chart are the 3 diamond-shaped, purple diamond-shaped decision points. Our charter as a city makes an allowance for certain items to not have to go through a formal bidding process. We have an informal bidding process, which shortens our advertising period quite a bit and also doesn't require us to go out to quite as many vendors for proposals or bids. And then we have a low cost, or level 1 cost, we call it, where we don't actually have to go out for competitive bids at all. We typically do, at least we get quotes for certain things. So this might be a smaller project. Think of an example, or maybe all the light fixtures on the pier lights have to be replaced, for instance. So we know exactly what the work is. We know what kind of bulbs we want. We know when they can do it. And so we might go out for one of these low cost items. And in that case, I can approve the plans and specifications to whatever extent they exist, and we can get a contract underway. The issue is these values are set in our charter. So that level 1 only applies to projects up to $15,000, which doesn't get you much these days. The second breakpoint there is at $50,000, where we go from an informal between 15 and 50,000 is the informal bidding process. And then above 50 is the formal bidding process. So I'm not sure exactly when these values were set. I think the last time the city evaluated its charter was about 20 years ago. And so I don't think it's any more recent than that. And this is a concept that the state of California uses under a specific purchasing program that general law cities can apply to be a part of, and charter cities are free to imitate without some of the accounting nightmare that the general law cities have to go through. But the values in those cases, instead of 15 and 50,000, are something like 50,000 and 175,000. So we're a little bit out of step with the California program. And one topic that the Budget and Finance Committee has talked about in the past is if and when a charter review is done, looking at those values and maybe taking them out of a set value in the charter and turning the value setting into a resolution process so the council can address those more frequently and kind of keep up with what the state is doing with its program. That said, there's a lot of boxes here, a lot of steps, and just again, really trying to communicate that we have this is a lot more difficult than hiring a plumber to clean out your drain line for a lot of the projects we do in terms of our process. And that's all part of the government process, which many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with. So for our projects, we have we have a big department. We may be larger than the police department. Ted, you may know, I don't know exactly, but we rival the police department in the number of employees, and are the two of those departments are the biggest two in the city. About 100 people right now, I think. Of those 100, though, that we have just less than 10% of that who are dedicated to delivering these capital projects in terms of managing them, procuring the services, and keeping the ball rolling, as it were. So 7 or so full-time equivalents in the engineering group, and about 1.5 people in the operations side handle that. And I use halves and full-time equivalents because some of these folks cannot dedicate full time. They've got other responsibilities as well. So really just about 10 people so who can really dive in and make all this happen. And when you think about 110 projects for 10 people, that's a lot of balls to keep in the air. So again, another reason that things take time. So this has been something that we've been addressing internally through a number of different initiatives. Several years ago, we began something called an online on-call design consultant or a bench of consultants. This was a contract mechanism that hadn't been used in the city, at least in recent memory, where the city council approves these on-call or indeterminate quantity, indeterminate scope contracts rather, and to various qualified firms to provide design services. And then as needs arise, we will assign certain tasks to each of those firms based on their unit pricing that they give in their contracts. These are a little bit less controlled by the council. They come through my office. Council does put a limit of $100,000 on each of these contracts and a 2-year timeline. So far, a couple of these we've taken back, or a number of these we've taken back for a First Amendment to get 2 more years and another $100,000. It seems to be beneficial, working out really well. Shortens the timeline a lot when we have design work in the tens of thousands and not the hundreds of thousands of dollars category. And so this has been used successfully. I think we have about 15 firms right now with these on-call design contracts. I mentioned the project limits, the purple boxes that we talked about just a moment ago, moving that from a charter idea or charter control to a resolution control. Again, something that we can't do until we review the charter, but that is reviewing the charter is among the council's goals and objectives in the current strategic plan. There's other charter and code modifications that would help us to clean up. And you know that everybody here is busy. The city attorney's office is no exception, but working with them to look at some of the procurement processes, see if we might make some streamline those a bit would be helpful. One thing in particular, our charter excuses public works projects that are maintenance in nature, but the word maintenance is a little too vague to make anybody comfortable drawing a hard line between this type of work and that type of work. So we have frequent conversations when we try to go through the city attorney's office for a non-competitive bidding process on things like roof repairs or putting in air conditioning units from certain vendors who supply the specified units that we're using. So things like that could be shorter if we could clean up some of that language. The staff report, we talked a little bit about staffing. Some of the initiatives we're taking with our decision packages this year include reclassifying some of the engineering staff to help us with our recruiting and our retention, providing some more upward mobility for our lower level engineers and bringing some of our other positions into closer alignment with salary scales in the neighboring cities. We've done some informal looks at those and we seem to be lagging behind. So the city council approved some money at the mid-year process to do a review of class and compensation for some targeted positions. And we'd like to encourage the city manager to consider engineering positions in that list. One great feature of our charter is that it recognizes the value of design build contracting, which is a design build delivery method or a project delivery method that involves hiring a single entity to do both the design and the construction. It's not something we've used a lot. We've done some purchase and install, which are similar type contracts, but the design portion is, at least of the civil features, are pretty minimal in that case. It's usually the design is around, the most recent one we used it for was for playground equipment at Veterans Park. And so the design of that playground equipment was well within the expertise of the provider, and they did a little bit of site work to prepare and install it. Design build, our first big project we've done, and again, anybody's recent memory here was for our skate park project, which includes installations at 2 sites. The site on the pier does involve some civil design work and some structural work, and so we are going through a design build process with them, but it was a little clumsy. It took us a year to get a contract. We had to spend a lot of money on legal fees to get the contract in place. But hopefully it's a good beginning for us. I would certainly, if somebody asked, recommend that we gain some expertise in this method, because we may have qualified projects that would be better delivered through this process in terms of a timeline. So that's something that we want to explore. And then this final idea is something called cooperative purchasing, which we use for material purchasing, sand and gravel, lumber, that kind of thing. We can borrow bids taken by other government agencies and use their pricing if they've gone through a competitive process that's similar to our either state code or local code. And then we can borrow their pricing and purchase directly from the identified low bidders in those situations. There are systems of cooperative purchasing that work for labor delivery. For instance, more than just purchasing a ton of asphalt, for instance, but purchasing labor to put in asphalt, to build a street, grind and overlay a street, for instance. We haven't really gone in that direction yet because of our concerns about competitive bidding in the public contract code. And so, again, if somebody asked, I would encourage the city to pursue this as an option, because it could shorten timelines on some of our more simple projects that don't require a great degree of specialty contracting experience. So those are some of the initiatives we're looking at, and we're slowly trying to work into our program here. Okay, this brings me to the end of my prepared comments, and our recommendations that we gave in the staff report were to receive and file the report and provide any additional input regarding shortening timelines or improving delivery services, looking at barriers and how to improve the process, and then also to ask the commission to consider a budget cycle or future strategic plan recommendations to the city council that would contribute to our improved delivery timelines. So with that, I'll stop sharing and turn it back over to you, Chair Simpson.
Thank you very much for the presentation, Andy. So I guess, are there any comments, commissioners? Laura, do we want to first take a motion to receive and file and then discuss, or what should the procedure here be? Discuss and then move to receive and file? Okay, so open for discussion. Commissioner Funabashi, your hand is up.
Thank you, Chair Simpson. Thank you, Andy, for that presentation. I think it was pretty clear. That was a crazy flow chart. I remember when we got that report, it was a little easier to follow, having looked at it a few times, easier tonight. You made a good point about the dollar amounts, though, and how those have changed, have not changed in some 20 years. And I'm wondering if, as a commission, and you were very forthcoming in sharing really what those numbers might be, if not 15 to 50,000 benchmarks, maybe 100 or 180,000 benchmarks. Is that a kind of a recommendation that we can make as a commission? And I guess my question is, who ultimately makes that decision on what those dollar amounts are going to be?
So the dollar amounts currently are set in the city charter. And so that'll be a decision of the voters ultimately. But the city council has a strategic plan item to begin the process of reviewing the city charter for any number of changes that might be warranted. And Budget and Finance Committee has made a recommendation in the past that topic be added to the list of things that is considered by a commission to review the city charter.
Commissioner Min, I believe you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I was kind of along the same question that Commissioner Funabashi had. I guess I'll change the flavor a little bit. How many out of the 110 projects that you guys have active? I mean, is the general average cost like, you know, a couple $100,000 each, or 15? I mean, I'm sure you have some very large ones and some very small ones. But I mean, for the very large projects, obviously you would have to have a more formal process. But things around 150, 200 grand doesn't go very far these days, especially given the price of materials. Like, it's like you can barely get anything out of the door for 200 grand. So I do support. I mean, so I do have that question. Like, generally, what's your general size of the projects that you have? I know that might be a hard question to answer, but I also support this idea of increasing the thresholds to make your life easier somehow. So I'll let you answer the question.
Yeah, thank you. Great question. And we don't get a lot of small projects, say under $100,000. And the challenge with those, when we can't combine them with something else, which is, by the way, what we try and do often, we'll try and combine, you know, what council member may have. Actually, it happened last year. They designated a certain couple of blocks of a street to be improved, ground and overlaid, or whatever the treatment was, outside of the residential rehab, which is our program to do all residential streets. So we just decided we would combine those together and do them at the same time. We get a lot better pricing from the contractor. And frankly, it's not that much more work. In fact, it's almost no more work for our project manager to add in a street or two here or there. So for instance, we do try and combine things when we can to get economies of scale in the market, as well as some economies with our own project management. So, however, that said, we do have some projects. Recently, we put new roofs on a couple of the buildings up at Dominguez Park, you know, that landed in the $100,000 range. Might have been a lot simpler if those breakpoints were higher, but they became complicated because of this. Is it maintenance or is it an improvement? And is it subject to the Public Works competitive bidding, or can we just go get some bids? So yeah, there are certain advantages to moving those values higher, even though we don't have a lot of projects in that category.
All right, that's great. I do have a bit of a follow-up question. Have you guys considered hiring a consultant project manager or consultant construction manager / scheduler estimator, you know, to help you with just the bandwidth?
Yeah. Thank you. We do have gotten into the practice of hiring construction managers, not so much schedulers or estimators, but construction era assistants to be on site, to be tracking the contractor's daily work, keeping track of certified payroll questions, that kind of thing. Our project managers, engineers were doing that prior, and it was just kind of bogging us down. It's a skill set that we've not only hired out, but we actually tried to include in one of our recent recruitments. We have a project on the books for a capital projects construction manager that didn't require a PE, and we were not getting a lot of good response in some of our positions that did require a PE. So we brought that one in parallel and advertised both at the same time. So we do value the position. We think it's very helpful. We haven't had as good a success when we've contracted a pure project manager, and we're in a position where consultants are managing consultants, and some of what we need to do and our duties with the city are a little bit further away than they maybe are comfortable sometimes. So we haven't had as good a success there. But with construction managers on site, keeping track of the day-to-day, yeah, that's been very advantageous. It does add cost to the project, somewhere around 10% of the project cost, which used to get buried when we did it ourselves in-house. And so those recognizing those costs up front are driving some of our project costing higher than they have in the past.
Okay, great. Thank you. And thanks for the flow charts. I very much know Chapter 10 of the LAPM. And I would avoid that as much as possible.
Yeah, sorry to hear that.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your response.
Commissioner Garcia, you have your hand up.
Yeah, this here is not an easy question. I worked in several cities, and some of the lists that Andy, that you put up there, I've pretty much gone through those, and I've actually analyzed all those things, and plus a few more. It just seems like it's not an easy question, because once engineering comes up with an idea for implementation, there could be the politics that comes back and says, hey, no, this is easier, we should do it this way. And so, yeah, it's not an easy question to answer. I don't believe there is an answer. It's depending on a lot of elements of the city. So, but I find, this as simple as you can get, to formulating a staff report that would, put out a project, and advertise for 6 weeks, and that normal process that when you go out to bid. I think anything closest to that would be the best, but you do have, like you said, the informal processes that you talked about that really has the on-call interpretation. Matter of fact, there's a lot of interpretations of the same laws of some of the things you listed. So some people say that informal process, it's actually the on-call process. And I know in the city of LA, they go, once they establish a list, they go sequentially through the list before they go back to the top. Others, they have them all, say, we got this project, you guys all bid, we'll take, whatever we think is the best, and that's another interpretation. So, I know it's not an easy answer, but, and you're probably not going to get an answer from me or any real recommendation, because I know it's a difficult situation, and it has to do with the attorneys, what they recommended, what's best for the city, depending on your charter and what you can get away with, because ultimately, you got to bend the law there to make it work. So anyways, that's just my input. I know it's a difficult question, and sorry about not having a clear recommendation, but yeah, it's a difficult question. I know that. That's all.
Thank you, Andy. Any other comments or questions from other commissioners? Do we have, yes, Commissioner Funabashi?
Thank you. Just a quick piggyback on what I was suggesting a moment ago, and that is, in looking into increasing those threshold minimum limits. But it dawned on me, because of a change in our charter and it being said that we'll have to go to a public vote. I just wanted to bring to the commission's attention that at some point in the not too distant future, maybe still a year or two off, the General Plan Advisory Commission and all the recommendations for zoning throughout the city will need to go to mayor and council and ultimately a vote of the city. So perhaps that election might be the time to do something like this, unless there's another appropriate time that would make it sooner. But just obviously wanted to bring that up.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Min.
Yeah, I just actually, Craig took some of the words out of my mouth. But I wanted to just ask staff if there's a way for us to get involved in any kind of working group or advisory group to help you with the threshold discussion. I think some of the commissioners on here would be a good fit for that. Definitely I'd be interested in providing some advice through to the council or whoever, if there's such a group to be formed in the near future. So I just recommend that we somehow get more involved in helping you move projects forward a little faster. You're not going to go very far with 50 grand and 15 grand. So right. I think communities would appreciate, would understand the need to vote for something like this, given that they can get their street fixed faster, right? I mean, everyone understands that. So any way we can help, I would just let us know.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to reply. I'm looking for in the strategic plan, Ted, maybe.
I've got that. I've got that, Andy.
Yeah, thank you.
Which is why I actually raised my hand for you, commissioners. Yeah, it is on the strategic plan. It's an item that the city attorney's office is taking lead with. It's scheduled to be due on the 5th of April, which I'm not certain it's actually on the agenda or will be on the agenda later this week. But the attorney's office, the charge is to provide a report to the council on options to establish a charter review committee. So not necessarily that he has one there. And then that committee's first meeting should be held in June the 5th. My understanding is that the city attorney's office is considering what that committee would comprise of. And I like Commissioner Min's suggestion that you have input that you can provide not only as a Public Works Commission, but also as members of the commission that have significant expertise in the field of public works construction and management.
And I would just add that most direct route is to appear at the city council meeting where they talk about it and share your conviction about membership on such a committee.
Are there any other comments or questions from commissioners? Seeing none, I should ask. Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Arata.
Chair Simpson, hi.
Yeah, hello. It's not clear when you actually want to speak. So when you want to speak, please just speak up. Go ahead.
Sure, I did. You have a perfect opportunity. Thank you, Chair Simpson. So I just have a question in terms of like, you had mentioned like light bulbs, maintenance projects. What is the average turnaround time for a request for something like, you said you had all those bulbs to do or something that needs to happen on the pier, like let's say pressure washing, the strand or the walk. What is the average time, request time for to completion on those?
Thanks for the question. I presume you're talking about requests from a resident through one of our portals that they can bring in requests. So I'll proceed with that answer unless there's something different. And I may defer to Ted on this. This happens more in operations actually than in the engineering group. We do have an online customer request. It used to be called Access Redondo. They've rebranded it recently into something else, simpler customer request button or something. But Ted, do you want to take that one? I think you probably understand Mike's process a little better than I do.
Sure. Yeah, Commissioner Irata, if it is a request through Concave or through services, we'll call it, most of the time, things like pressure washing of the Esplanade, that's done by in-house staff. So it's really a matter of where does that fit on their schedule? And is that something that they do, on a weekly basis, bi-weekly basis, et cetera? If there's an emergency, then obviously we are much more responsive to that than we are of just routine cleaning, which we get for both the Esplanade, Artesia, Riviera Village. If it's a request that's going to require more significant capital level costing of construction, and sometimes we have to contract that kind of work out. Again, we look at that, is that an emergency job or is that something that we could, diagram and try to solicit bids for? If it's something more significant, then we will work with Andy's team at the engineering department or division in order to create plans and specifications eventually for some of that construction. But something as simple as pressure washing, I know we have a routine schedule. Our staff has been jumping from priority to priority, but they will fit that in as quickly as possible. And it is not something that takes very long at all.
Okay, I understand. When you had showed that, or when we had the graph was displayed, I just saw that under like harbors and piers, and I was just wondering how far that reached out to include, like if it included that part of the maintenance, the regular maintenance, or if it was like
right.
New project.
Yeah, that far right column, is that what you're talking about?
Let me see. Well, I was on watching it on. I just got locked out. I believe it was on the right side. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a lot of maintenance functions that are routine, and so they're schedulable. Tree trimming and street sweeping, things that we do by contract that have to be negotiated every few years. And then there's in-house things like traffic signal maintenance, streetlight maintenance, pier maintenance, park maintenance, those kinds of things. And it's all Ted's team, but the operations side, Ted works in the operations building, so I call it Ted's team, but it's really Mike Klein's team, our deputy director. The operations guys are all, responsive to the things. And if it's not a routine thing that they'll be doing the next week or two, they'll add it in. So we do have a team that works at the pier that's responsible for regular pier maintenance. They are short-staffed, as I understand it right now. So that's probably the bigger issue with being super responsive to a lot of calls that come in, is we just, like you hear about in the news for almost every sector, employment sector, short staff.
Yeah.
Some of the entry level type employees, hard to find those people sometimes.
Any other questions, comments from commissioners? Then moving on to, is there any comments or questions from the public, either written or in person?
There are no other comments.
Okay, thank you very much. Then I guess I would suggest that we consider some sort of a motion that reflects the conversations and questions that we've had. So we need to move to accept and file, but we probably want to add some other thoughts to our recommendations. Is there someone who'd like to make an appropriate motion?
I'll make a motion that we receive and file this presentation with an attachment of the noted comments that the commissioners have made.
Before we ask for a second, would you want to just have the comments that have been made included?
Well, I was going to say generally from the minutes that were taken, but we could, if we want to include in the motion, I think the biggest overriding comment really had to do with adjusting the cost minimums to reflect more reasonable. Yeah, so I'll make a motion to receive and file the presentation with an attachment of the comments made by commissioners to include assessment of adjusting or changing the minimum thresholds for project approval.
Director Simon, I see your hand up.
I did, and really I want to say thank you, Commissioner Funabashi, because at the beginning when you said just the comments made by the commission, I was going to say, please be a little bit more explicit than just the comments made by the commission. That becomes a little ambiguous to us. If it's to increase the thresholds, the purchasing, acquisition, contracting thresholds, that's fantastic. If you've got a recommendation that may be going to the charter committee and as well as to the city council, that would be great amongst any other comments you may have for them.
May I offer, can the chair offer a friendly amendment? Can we also add the amendment that we're concerned about staff levels and encourage the city to do everything it can to get staff levels to where they should be? Is that possible as a friendly amendment?
I would certainly accept that as an amendment. I'm just trying to formulate something a little more concise. I totally hear what the idea of exploring appropriate staff level to accommodate project needs.
Commissioner Garcia, your hand is up.
Yeah, I like where Commissioner Funabashi is going, but I also, want to make sure that you include, I think Commissioner Min had a good idea that there should be some more discussion before, you make some recommendations about the charter and all that, because there are some relatively new laws on contracting out. And so those need to be incorporated and interpreted into whatever process that, Andy listed there. And I believe that, that's what I said. It's a complicated issue. And I think more discussion, and you need to bring the attorneys and, other people from the city in on the discussion before you make a recommendation. But yeah, I like where Commissioner Funabashi is going, receive and file and take some of the comments that were made in this meeting.
Well, and I think that essentially was because I knew there were a couple other things above and beyond the minimum pricing thresholds like we were discussing. And so to obviously include that and staffing levels, appropriate staffing levels. And if I hear you correctly, maybe a good composition to that would be that a more broad look at the city charter overall with updates to the charter that reflect more of public works needs these days when it comes to bidding and or accomplishing the projects. Yeah, I'm having a tough time trying to make it real concise.
Right, it's a complicated issue. Yeah, there's some legal recent state of California laws that passed within the last 5 to 10 years that impact contracting out, and those need to be incorporated with the stated charter. And I'm not sure. I'm not a lawyer, so I couldn't tell you all the ins and outs of that. But those have to be incorporated in whatever you decide, no matter what.
Can I just interject a thought here, if I may, and then I'll call on Commissioner Bajaj. I mean, it seems to me that there are two things that we're sort of discussing here. One is the need to get the levels higher to reflect the reality of the current economic situation. And then I think Commissioner Garcia, you're starting to address the how of how that's done. And that is a complex project, and it'll probably have to involve the group that's going to be put together by the city attorney to look at the charter. So, I mean, I think it's possible to perhaps mention all of those, but the bottom line of we need to get those levels at the right point, I think is very important.
Yeah, well, I think the main thing is to shorten the process. And yeah, I've tried several times in several cities, and it's a difficult question, and I'm not sure if I was really successful in those cities, but it just seems like, it runs into politics and law.
Yeah. Commissioner Bajaj, and then I see that Director Saman wants to address this, but Commissioner Bajaj?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the staff for that report. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but the staff's report includes those recommendations to revisit these dollar values that we're talking about, as well as to recruit and onboard staff to fulfill gaps in staffing needs. So it sounds like our recommendations are really just supporting, our comments are really just supporting what staff's recommendations were in the report. So if we just do the review and file, we in essence are supporting the recommendations which staff made, which are adjusting those values, finding a way to adjust those values and to, recruit staffing. So correct me if I'm wrong there. The question to staff is, if we just review and file, does that get the point across? You obviously know what we're trying to get at and how we're trying to support you.
My understanding is if we receive and file, it essentially just goes into our files, and we really haven't taken any specific action. And my understanding of the situation, and please staff correct me if I'm wrong, if we want to endorse some particular thing that staff has suggested, we should affirmatively take that action and say this is important enough that we endorse it.
All right. So, Andrew, what's your take?
Yeah, I would concur with Chair Simpson on that. I wrote the recommendations to be fairly neutral, and although I did have some opinions about things that I think would help, but I wanted to leave that in your hands and not put those words in your mouth for the recommendations.
Got it. Thank you for clarifying. So then it does look like we should craft a well-worded motion kind of along the lines of what Commissioner Funabashi was getting at, and just kind of fine-tune it to really get those, wordsmith it to, clean it up to what we want to see.
Yeah, Commissioner Funabashi, you've got your hand up. Have you taken the opportunity to track what you're rambling on about?
I have, and I did it by hand, and I'm actually doing bullet point markers with my pen. So, and it's got 3 points, so I think you're going to like it. So my motion is to receive and file the report as presented, with an emphasis of support from the commission to 1, increase minimum cost thresholds, 2, increase staff to meet department and project demands, and 3, other changes to the city charter as suggested by city staff and city attorney. Is that, did I do 4, Ted?
No, you didn't. I want to add number 4, and that was why I had my hand raised before. I heard Commissioner Min wanting to provide input to the Charter Review Committee. And maybe that's part of your recommendation, is that they come back to you as a commission and or as individuals to solicit your input on means and methods of improving project delivery and implementation.
Sure. So that third bullet point would be other suggested changes to this, other changes to the city charter as suggested by staff, city staff, and or charter review committee.
Did you want to include as part of your recommendation for that charter review committee to come back to you as a commission, soliciting your input on that charter review so that you could get that out? I mean, whether they do or not, that's up to the city council, but at least that may be part of your recommendation, if I heard Commissioner Min correctly in wanting to do so.
So I was going to, maybe we'll add the 4th bullet point that would be that specific exercise. Maybe the 4th one could read, to include the Charter Review Committee reviewing its findings with the Public Works Commission for additional input.
I don't know if you want to say review the findings, because usually if they get to the findings point, that's later on in the process.
Yeah.
You want that input early on.
Right. Is it more like more of a collaboration?
May I suggest that it be that they consult with the planning commission as they develop their charter review?
Did you mean Public Works Commission?
What did I say?
You said Planning Commission.
I'm terrible. I meant Public Works.
Oh, okay. I think I've got it. Oh gosh, I just so back to the 3rd bullet point, which says and suggested other changes to the city charter as proposed by the Charter Review Committee with input from the Public Works Commission. So it kind of puts it on the city charter committee to get input from us.
I'll second that.
Okay, I see a motion and a second.
Before we do that, Ted, do you see that as kind of that verbiage accomplishing the goal of what our intention is?
It may, the way that I would have thought about it is to have the Charter Review Committee solicit input from the Public Works Commission as they develop their potential changes. So rather than forcing them or asking them to do this, we're recommending to the City Council that they incorporate that into the Charter Review Committee duties as coming to the Public Works Commission, soliciting their input.
We can make that a 4th bullet.
I'm with you, Commissioner Bajaj. Let's make a 4th bullet point that states just that specifically, that the Charter Review Committee solicit input from Public Works Commission.
Yeah.
Keep it simple, right? And concise.
Everybody understands the motion. Is there a second?
I'll second the revised addition of the fourth bullet point there.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Just checking again. Is there any public comment on any of this?
There's no public comment.
Seeing none, let's call for a vote. I assume this will be a roll call vote.
Yes. Okay. Commissioner Arata?
She seems to be muted. Commissioner Arata, are you there?
Aye, yes, hello.
Thanks. Commissioner Glass?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Commissioner Garcia?
Yeah, I appreciate where this is going. Yes.
Commissioner Funabashi?
Yes.
Commissioner Bajesh?
Yes.
Vice Chair Min?
Yes.
Chair Simpson?
Yes. Looks like it passes unanimously. Which again takes us to item J2, which is the discussion on traffic calming implementation, discussion of processes, timelines, and barriers. Andy, are you
Yep,
adding that?
I'll take this one too, and I'll share my screen again. And this is where I'm missing Gene a lot. By the way, you probably all got the message that he has moved on to next chapter for him. And I am I'm not even I was going to say a rookie traffic engineer. I'm not even a traffic engineer. I'm just an observant civil engineer trying to learn how to do traffic engineering. So one of Ted's career goals is to make a traffic engineer out of me before I'm done. So we'll see where this goes. Let me share my screen here. Big night for process tonight. Again, driven by the strategic plan and City Council's priorities as presented therein. We'll talk about our traffic calming implementation process. If this feels familiar, this is a topic that this body addressed almost 4 years ago now, 2018. There were a number of conversations about our process of prioritizing and delivering traffic calming responses from resident requests, council requests, and that kind of thing. So I'll talk a little bit about our current process. But at that time, 4 years ago, there was a recommendation made by this body to, I would say, more enhance the process than actually change a process. And so no new process has been to council, although the enhancements that were recommended here have been put into play on a number of occasions and have worked well. So kind of a hybrid of putting into play what had been recommended, but probably not all the way over the goal line in terms of getting a traffic calming process change to the city council. But COVID happened and a lot of other things have happened in that time, and the city council has now found their way back to this topic. It's on the strategic plan, not just with a goal under the category of enhancing delivery of city services, but a specific objective to accelerate implementation of traffic calming improvements. And there's two parts to that equation. One is after the traffic calming improvement has been decided upon, and that's the easier part to implement and the part that we can control better. The harder part is coming up with the actual improvement that will be implemented. And that is, in the traffic engineering world, that is an iterative process where the standard practice is to make the least, I don't know if invasive is or intensive maybe type of applications because we are addressing driver behavior here. Radical changes are harder for drivers maybe to adjust to on a long-term basis. So our process is a slow one, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But when we talked 4 years ago, there were several ideas that we discussed. This first bullet point here, a holistic or a neighborhood approach as opposed to a street by street or corner by corner approach, realizing that when you install traffic calming on a given street, It perhaps slows traffic on that street, but it also diverts traffic to other streets for the people who don't want to go slow. And so that has a neighborhood effect. And so the recommendation that was made 4 years ago after 3 meetings with this body and another public workshop was to, as a rule, try and incorporate a holistic neighborhood approach rather than a street by street approach. And so we've done that with a number of corridors that you all, many of you at least, are familiar with, whether it's Inglewood neighborhood corridor north of 190th Street, or the Ford corridor between Artesia and Aviation, or Fisk Lane traffic circles, or Emerald Street between PCH and Prospect. We have taken all of those to council. Beryl Street was another one to council, kind of on a corridor approach or holistic neighborhood approach. And we've gotten some good results there, but not without some bumps along the way. Public outreach is another question. How much to do, how much is too much, how much is too slow. There's always somebody who said, I never heard about the meeting, or I didn't get to give my opinion. And so how do we measure that correctly? Prioritization, as professionals, we would always want to put our safety issues to the top of the list. Safety sometimes is in the eye of the beholder, and so that's not always an easy measurement to make. And then, there's competition at times about whose project will get implemented first. And we asked 4 years ago. Well, no, we asked 5 years ago. And so working through a prioritization scheme. And then this idea of incremental installations through iterative process. Traffic engineers are data-driven largely. A lot of the warrants for various, these aren't traffic calming, but warrants for signals and stop signs are based on data. A lot of the requests that we get from residents and council can be something other than scientific data. It might be anecdotal data, but it is passionate data sometimes, and drives the process more than some of the things that we read in our traffic engineering books. So a lot of issues to consider here. And again, not meaning to pull this group into a long conversation, since it is a bit murky and hard to manage, but we did want to at least tell you that we are going to council through the strategic plan directive next month to talk to them about ideas that could be implemented, to see what things are important to them, and wanted to give this group an opportunity to speak into it again before we did that. Let me talk about our currently adopted policy. This slide that I'm showing, and I hope you can see it, Member Arata, because it wasn't in your agenda package, but it does involve our 3-phase process that we've used, where the public is initiating a request. Staff will review the conditions, come up with some alternatives, but they're, like I said, they're minimally intrusive types, refreshing signs and striping and pavement markers, maybe requesting some enforcement to enhance people's awareness of the speed limit, for instance, or whatever it might be not being obeyed. And then there's a review period that can last a few months. And then if that's not effective, we move on to the next step. All that might take 5 or 6 months. And to the public, that may seem too long just to do something about the speed on our street. But that is the iterative and scientific process. Phase 2 would be where the staff realizes that phase 1 isn't doing the job through their observations. They might recommend some different striping, alignment issues, narrowing lanes, adding edge line striping, making physical alterations to the traveled way, additional signage or regulatory restrictions. We've done some restricted left turns, for instance, during certain hours of the day to create hopefully better traffic flows. So those things, because they alter the roadway, do require review by this group, by this commission, and by the city council. That's the timeline, of course. And then we will, once those are implemented, assuming those two bodies approve the recommendations, it's followed by a 6-month process of review just to determine effectiveness, including data collection, before and after comparisons, that kind of thing. And then if that's not effective, then we'll move on to the next phase, which is much more intrusive and might include radar feedback signs or other physical capital type implementations, bulb outs, horizontal, vertical deflections, and the like. So speed cushions, and that has its own separate resident process that also takes some time. So anyway, these iterative process sometimes can take years, and that can be frustrating to residents who think the city ought to be doing something a little more quickly. So that's the one hand, is the time it takes to go through a deliberate process versus the need that people feel to get something done more quickly. And that's assuming that the thing to be done more quickly is agreed upon, because oftentimes residents will be split within a block about what they prefer to see on their particular street, and or this block over that block might prefer different things. And so trying to decide what to do oftentimes is the bigger challenge. So I haven't given you very much there other than if we thought the last problem was sticky with capital improvement implementation, then this one is also sticky in terms of what to do and how to do it, and how to keep the process moving forward and not lingering too long, balanced with let's try and get the right thing done. At times our council has taken an approach to kind of bypass some of the data that we presented. And for instance, most of you are aware of our program to experiment with mini traffic circles on a couple of streets. We found some really good results in terms of slowing vehicle speeds, 85th percentile speeds down, sometimes even volumes down, and yet residents just weren't sure what to do with those things. And we've learned some lessons about implementation and trials and that kind of thing that we might do differently next time. But again, that was one of the things where the data doesn't always drive the decision. And so looking for your thoughts and input on bringing this forward to City Council, and what kinds of things in your experience, because you guys have, if you've been on the commission for a while, have addressed things and a number of the residents and their concerns. And we'd like to make sure we take the most important lessons learned forward with us at that time. So here's the recommendations. They're also on your staff report. So I'll stop sharing and turn it back over to the chair.
Andy, before you stop sharing, if I may add to your presentation, go back to the prior slide where you showed the different phasing.
Yeah.
I actually wanted to say thank you to Andy. Yes, we are going to make a traffic engineer out of you someday. You'll get there. You're halfway there right now, just in the presentations you're making. But I wanted to at least walk through the phasing and why there's time that's involved. First, from the staffing perspective, we're talking about the staffing limitations that we have. If we were to have staff look at every phase of potential traffic calming right from the get-go, that is a significant time requirement of our staff to do. So if they were to contemplate restriping a roadway segment, that takes time. And that takes time for very significant reasons, because we could draw concepts and share concepts with you. But a lot of times what we find is if we're off by half a foot or 1 foot from the actual curb to curb dimensions, it actually prohibits us from being able to implement certain improvements. And that's shown itself to be critical at times when we contemplate, that we're able to put in or maintain the travel lanes, as well as maybe put in a dedicated bike lane. And we find ourselves, instead of having the minimum of 12 feet between the curb and the bike lane, we find that we only have 11 and a half feet. That's significant. That isn't something that we have the option to consider, putting in a bike lane. It could be an edge line, but it can't actually be a bike lane. So when we say it takes 9 to 12 months in phase 2, it's because it will require some staff time and a lot of investigative work for them to do. And then obviously with the more intrusive phase 3, even something as what it sounds simple to talk about a bulb out, or bulb outs in design have really shown themselves to be quite complex for us, especially if we have utilities, utility poles, pool boxes, other infrastructure in the ground. So yes, they do take a lot of time, and we want you as well as the city council to be aware that these things are very time consuming. And I wanted to go back to the phase one and Andy's point about this being an iterative process. There are prescriptive numerical elements that we have to look at when we contemplate recommendations of traffic improvements. I'm not going to call them traffic calming because a stop sign is not a traffic calming device. A stop sign is an actual traffic control device. A traffic signal or a modification to signal phasing or operation. These aren't traffic calming. These are pretty significant elements that do require a significant amount of design, but they have prescriptive data that's in manuals. The California MUTCD, as an example, it tells you the number of accidents, correctable accidents, and I know you've heard that term used in the past, number of correctable accidents within a certain period of time, typically a 12-month period, that would support a recommendation to install a stop sign, install left turn phasing, etc. So these things are not arbitrary. They are pretty significant and pretty prescriptive. When we get to the enhancements, we'll call them, the traffic calming, yes, that's data that we'd love to get, not only the input, but we want it to be an iterative process, because there are times where you have residents that may be supportive of edge lines, and they are least intrusive from a circulation perspective for them as residents, but they're not very supportive, or not majority of them are supportive of speed cushions, as an example. And we found that out the hard way on prior considerations for speed cushions, which was why this phasing sort of approach was there. It's complex, as Andy said, it's a lot more subjective than it is objective. We love to do the numerical objective data. The subjective data, that's where we start to fall short, and we're trying to implement whatever you and the city council will recommend. So with that, Andy, thank you for giving me the opportunity to add to your presentation, and we'll turn it over to you, Chair, for more questions and comments.
May I ask a question while you've got that up there still? When you say 5 to 6 month timeline, so that would be 6 months to get phase one implemented, right? And so decide you have to go to phase two. Does that then mean it's 9 to 12 months on top of that, or are you measuring from the very beginning of when you started doing things?
No, these are additive.
Okay, so potentially if you started to do something and 6 months down the road, you decided, oops, we got to do more, that could take another year, so it'll be 18 months, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Other questions and or comments? Yes, Commissioner Min.
Hey, thanks, Andy and Ted for that. I feel like this three-phase approach is a kind of a timid way of approaching traffic calming. I mean, it's not a bad way, but I feel like we should be starting out sometimes on straight up to phase two, or something in between phase one and two. And an example of that, those traffic circles that we had discussed, in prior meetings many months ago, where they were put in on various streets throughout the city as a test. The data actually showed reduction in speeds, right? But then we took them out because no one liked them and they were ugly, right? So despite the traffic data backing up the efficacy of those traffic circles, we took them out because no one really liked them, and the council probably didn't like them. They probably got a lot of complaints and things, right? But if we had made them look really nice, spend a little more money, right, than just temporary measures, maybe some of them could have stayed in, right? Because the community would have been like, well, look, I've got this nice landscape thing. Yeah, it costs a little bit more, but maybe we could have had a few more traffic circles in the city, right? So I guess my point is that I think the staff, they know what works and doesn't work, and part of the community engagement process that could be done, maybe a more involved, more comprehensive community engagement process could be done ahead of an installation of like a phase 2 project. But sometimes the phase 1 kills the phase 2, and we don't want that necessarily to happen, right? Like in the case of the traffic circles. So I don't know how, I don't really know what my recommendation is exactly, but maybe a consideration that the investment in capital and planning and community engagement may be worth going straight to phase 2 or something more than just phase 1 where we have temporary cheap things out there, because no one really likes that, right? I mean, from a traffic engineering standpoint, that makes a lot of sense. We'll get the data will back us up, and we'll use that data to then go to the council, get money, and then it all makes like logical sense. But from the community perspective, it's just ugly traffic cones and barricades and temporary striping out on the street that just makes our life like not as happy as it was before. Or maybe it does slow it down, but it looks ugly. So I as a traffic engineer myself, I understand this 3-phase approach is like very logical. But as a community member, I'm like, I don't want that in my community because it's so ugly. But I could sell it to my neighbors if I say, oh, well, it's going to have nice flowers on it. It's going to, kids will feel safer walking because, it just brings the community together. That kind of perspective, I think, needs to be captured somehow in your traffic calming strategic plan, or what the process that you're going is like. How do you get the community kind of amped up for something a little bit nicer? It may take a little more time to get it designed and get it in the ground, but they'll support it more, right? Because it'll be like this cool thing that could all get behind. So that's just a comment. I don't really have a recommendation other than just to kind of think about how that could be incorporated into your traffic calming plan. And that's it. Thanks.
Chair, you're muted.
Apologies, Commissioner Bajaj.
Hi there. Yeah, thank you for that. I think when Commissioner Min at the beginning said, maybe condensing into one or, maybe like a hybrid of phase 1 and 2, I kind of see the value in that. Also being a traffic engineer and doing a lot of these similar type of projects for communities that I work with. A lot of times I don't find that that communities is satisfied as much with sometimes just some simple refreshments of things, and then going from a phase 1 to a phase 2, it just adds more staff time with engagement and so forth. I think I like the format. I like the flow. It's very easy to consume for everybody. If I could see, I think maybe my recommendation would be maybe just to add a little bit, add maybe a few more options in phase 1, or maybe like a little bit more of an open. I know that those alternatives that you listed were just examples, but maybe just something like, if you could share your screen one more time, Andrew, with that, phase 1. Some other, right here, it says alternatives include refreshing signs, striping, and pavement markings, requesting focus enforcement. I think maybe enhance that right there a little bit so that phase 1 is a little bit more robust, right? So phase 1 could be alternatives include refreshing signs, refreshing or adding signs, striping and pavement markings, and let me see what's in your like edge line striping, or maybe you can add like and consideration of other low cost or non I don't know what's the proper way, but like other low cost and easy to implement solutions, something like that. Because sometimes warning signs can help out, or if you do see a collision pattern, turn restrictions just based on a collision pattern, which are things that don't require outreach. But I think maybe just beefing up the alternatives from phase 1 might be a little bit more reassuring that it's not just repainting pavement marking, that there might be a little bit more thought put into phase 1 tool that can maybe nip the problem in the bud right then and there. So it saves staff time from even going on to phase 2 and 3.
Commissioner Bajaj and maybe Commissioner Min, if I may, while Andy has this up, what I'm hearing is sort of a combination of a phase 1, phase 2 approach being the first phase, if you will, where you're not looking to just refresh existing and request enforcement support. Look for low-cost, non-capital type of improvements to be recommended in the initial phase. And then what we call now phase 3 for the more intrusive, don't consider the temporary type of installations. When those are brought forward, truly bring forward a consideration for a permanent installation. And as Commissioner Min mentioned with the mini circles or mini roundabouts, those were ugly. They were effective technically, but they were ugly. They would be costing more, obviously, to design and construct. But we know the council has not shied away from implementing traffic calming measures. So that may very well be the approach that is better supported, and that is to design and construct more permanent type installations, if I'm hearing you both correctly.
Yes,
Yes.
I think so. I think, some type of combination of phase 1 and phase 2, like some things like additional signage and regulatory restrictions, which are in phase 2, sometimes can be easily implemented in phase 1. And now we've shortened the timeline and really shortened up staff, resources with additional engagement. Some of these neighborhood community meetings can get very, long, drawn out. There's a lot of prep time, or sometimes there's, different neighbors that might want to have little side discussions. It's just, also just a matter of resources. I'm sure there is no shortage of requests that you have to get through. And so minimizing sometimes your time spent on each one could be
If I could just
an advantage.
If I could just refine my comment a little bit, I think I think we should not be afraid to go to the capital option if it makes sense. I guess that's my point. It's like, if there's a really good situation and context sensitive, obviously, and with lots of community support, let's go for the phase 3 from the get-go, and not spend like a year and a half doing phase 1 and 2. So my point is like that can sometimes get you more support and potentially more capital funds to actually make it happen and be permanent versus, a trial period that might end up going away. So I guess that's just to refine my comments from earlier.
So Commissioner Garcia, I think you have your hand up next.
Yeah, I think Commissioner Min just kind of clarified what I was going to say, but yeah, basically you have the 3 phases. It appeared that they were based on the more costly was in phase 3 and like cost almost nothing on phase 1. But Commissioner Min was saying, if we invest a little more capital up front, in the first phase, then, it might get community buy-off better. And, but that would require, city council approval before you would get those kind of funds, I assume. And so that would make phase 1 longer, in a sense. I mean, I'm not sure how you based your timeline on the months, per phase, but I think would that trigger a longer phase 1 if you did invest more phase 3 capital into phase 1 to get the funds to do that? Andy or Ted?
Yeah, I'm just trying to process your question. I think I understand what you're saying, and I certainly echo your observations, Commissioner Min. Our lesson learned with mini traffic circles is go big or go home, right? So we did do that. I saw some flyers from somewhere in the city of LA, I think it was, a neighborhood flyer that says, we're installing this. And it wasn't, come tell us what you think about it. It was just, we're installing this, get ready, it's coming. And that is an approach I would have liked to have had in my tool belt when it came to traffic circles, because they were so effective. I do think the point about combining phase 1 and 2, for instance, I can see already looking at phase 1 that we could, as soon as we get a request, we could just go do the refreshing and the striping as just part of our regular maintenance activities, and then kind of monitor it while we're developing the phase 2 solutions, for instance, so they overlap more rather than a wait and see approach. That's an easy way to shorten some of these timelines. And to your point, Commissioner Garcia, about the capital projects, I suppose it depends on how big a project it is. And we do have a kind of a project definition called traffic calming that gets funded annually, typically with a few $100,000. If there was something we could put in for $50,000 and the budget was available, then it wouldn't be a matter of having to find money and go to council for it. Although the approving of the plans and specs and awarding a construction contract would have to go through council as part of our routine process. So, I think I'm hearing that you and I think there probably are ways to be a little bit less, what's the right word? I don't know that it's timid, although I appreciate the comment.
It's basically making
deliberate. Maybe it's just deliberate, and maybe we don't need to be quite as deliberate, or at least the more than just the easiest things first. But maybe we can overlap some of these phases. By the way, we have an opening for a traffic engineer. If either of you said anything or interested, keep your eyes open for our recruitment. Okay, so it's a great place to work.
Andy, I got to say, that's a great plug. That's fantastic. And really to Commissioner Garcia's point, yes, it would add time just by its nature, because designing an interim mini roundabout, as an example, is just a design. The installation is relatively easy, etc. If we're going to be putting in a permanent roundabout, then that not only requires civil design, we've got to contemplate, the vehicular movement, the pedestrian movement, irrigation systems that goes into it, etc. It would add some time. It'll be no different than any other capital project that will go through either the bench or independent RFPs, depending on the size of it. But overall, I think if you merge, as Andy said, maybe we call them phase 0, phase 1 and phase 2, because you're right, during the initial phase when the requests come in, it's not complicated for us to refresh existing striping and signage if it's needed while we collect data and make observations. And if we need to do further improvements, further enhancements, what we call today phase 2 should truly become our phase 1. And if the recommendation when we come to the commission is to consider putting in more permanent type of installations such as roundabouts, bulb outs, etc., and that's a recommendation that goes to the city council, and we go at that point with cost estimates and timelines more for permanent type installations, not interim installations, and then come back 6 or 12 months later for consideration of a long-term or permanent type of installation.
Yeah, thank you, Ted. Yeah, that kind of answers the question, and I like your phasing currently as adopted because it takes the least expensive in the beginning and kind of it allows you to implement it without a lot of approvals, and then as you go more expensive to phase 3, it gets longer because of the different approvals and all that, and more money. And so that's a good philosophy, and I'm I would back that 100%. But in order to get where Commissioner Min is, you would have to go big and go fast, like Andy said, and that would basically, I don't know what would trigger between the two philosophies, but I think it's a good idea, but I actually like your idea as well because it's safer and it's economically more reasonable, I think.
Commissioner Bajaj, you have your hand up, and then Commissioner Glass.
Maybe phase 1 could be anything that the engineering division can do without city council approval. Phase 2 could be anything that requires city council approval, and then phase 3 is anything high capital. Maybe that gives, phase 1, your engineers all the flexibility they need to, try to target the issue with what they feel is appropriate, because anything it looks like in Redondo Beach that's even moderate, like an edge line or stop sign or anything there where there's public engagement, that seems to be where the city council approval is required. So maybe another way to sort of to think on that. But then going back to like, throwing a lot of high capital projects out there, then, obviously it becomes the challenge of when you go big or go home to identify then the prioritization of what locations receive, the big projects. Then I guess at that point you use the data to drive it of the highest volumes and highest speed, and then target those locations first. Or if you're gonna, go high capital for a traffic circle or something. So just two separate comments, but just, kind of throwing those ideas out there.
Commissioner Glass?
Okay, based on the discussion that I've been hearing, I think we all would like to see a more flexible system. And so part of it is, in what we call it, is a policy. A policy sounds awfully firm. I would actually change the title of the thing, first of all, to flexible process. And then we don't have to get hung up on the phases. The phases actually will evolve into the next, each phase will evolve into the next phase as it becomes apparent, if it becomes apparent, that it hasn't solved the problem. So we've got to have a process that is iterative and has some feedback in it, says, has this solved the problem? What is our next step? What is acceptable step? So that's about it.
Other comments? Well, I have just one thought that, I thought that it was important that at some point we started to adopt a more holistic approach. And whether we combine elements of 1, 2, and 3, or how we do that, and I'm hearing that it might be good to get into phase 2 quicker and make that almost phase 1. It's important that we take that holistic neighborhood approach. I think we should continue to do that. Other comments? Anybody feel that, oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Glass, your comment? Commissioner Glass?
No, I just removed the hand. I forgot to do it.
All right, okay. Much easier to be doing this all in person. I think we would understand it a lot better. So does anyone, having heard all of this conversation, does anyone have a motion that they would like to offer? I assume again, it would be receive and file and something else, but.
Yeah, maybe I'll make a motion similar to Commissioner Futabashi's on the last one. I'd like to move that we receive and file and take into the comments in this session, and let's see, as far as clarity, I guess combining the phases or condensing the phases to make it more expeditious, I believe. Is that a good way to say it?
Before we go that route, for staff, do you think that this is something that you would like to take a quick look at and maybe come back and talk about at another time? Or do you feel that you have enough feedback from us where you would be able to just kind of make some of those improvements and just review and file this?
Yeah, from the comments that were made, I believe they're like Commissioner Min, I believe he was talking about pushing phase 3 into phase 1 to some, so that's what I meant by combining, or, like Commissioner Simpson and yourself was saying, basically combine phase 1 and 2. So somehow squeezing those phases to be more expeditious is kind of what I was kind of visualizing, but I don't know, did I interpret that wrong?
I think you did. I'm just not sure if staff was going to be, I'm not sure if they are, and I'm going to let them answer, but are maybe they might need to spend some time mulling it over to see if there is an appropriate way to take it from 3 phases to 2 phases.
Yeah, I think ultimately we would leave it up to them to find out where it's headed, but yeah, what they can do with those phases is kind of, I think, in their hands. Whereas, you know, our input was to squeeze them down to some extent.
So, Commissioner, excuse me, Andrew, you have your hand up.
Oh, I'll defer to Commissioner Arata. I think has tried to jump in here a couple times, if you don't mind.
Commissioner Arata.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that, please?
I'm just deferring to you. I thought you were trying to say something.
Well, no, my thoughts were, is there any way, you must have been able to read my mind, but my thoughts were, are you able to revise like phase 1 and 2 or 3 or priority based or urgency?
Yes and no, to answer that. Sometimes urgency is in the eye of the resident. So
you were going to say that.
Prioritize safety issues that are recognizable, measurable kinds of things. And so those will always be a top priority, and I don't want to be too flippant about the question. I do think the prioritization of the capital is important, not just the capital, but the staff resources as well. So we do try and balance that pretty well, and bring things as quickly to this group and the city council as we can. There was a previous question I wanted to try and answer about our process here. The strategic plan is calling the staff to bring a report of ideas of what might be able to be done on April 19th or by April 19th, which is the second or I guess third meeting in April. So we intend to do that with the information we gather here. It wouldn't surprise me if the council said, go back to the Public Works Commission and figure it out, you know, and then bring back a final plan to us at some later date. Or maybe they'll ask us to do something faster, I'm not sure. But we will certainly include the good ideas we've heard here in our report in terms of a toolbox of things that the council might find helpful from their point of view to enhance the delivery of these kind of services to the public. So my hunch would be, you'll see this again, I guess, to answer the question before it's set in stone. But I don't want to make a career out of reading the council's mind or predicting what they'll do. So I'll leave it there.
Commissioner Min, I believe you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to just clarify. I don't necessarily think the way the phases are defined are necessarily bad or anything. I think they might be appropriate. I just don't necessarily think we should be going in sequence. Like the phase 1, 2, 3 could just, you could say A, B, C, or whatever. It can change. However you want to categorize it is, I think, up to your discretion. I just wouldn't want necessarily for us to be deliberately going through phase 1 before phase 2. So more deliberately thinking about what the appropriate phase would be given the context of the community's sentiment and the specific context of that street or that neighborhood, and consider a potential phase 2 or 3 product as the first go at it. And I think that's kind of encapsulates the comments. And I kind of liked how Commissioner Glass was kind of characterizing it as being a flexible system versus just 1, 2, 3. You got to do 1 before you do 2, etc. So perhaps in the motion, I think we have a motion.
Okay. Half a motion.
Half a motion. Yeah, it's just maybe some terms related to flexibility and.
We have a motion on the floor, but Director Simon has his hand up. Maybe he wants to add some clarification. Motion has not yet been seconded.
Yeah, I do. Thank you, Chairperson. What I'd really like to see is there's a couple of things, right? We come to you typically in April in preparation of the city's budget for both capital and non-capital. Is there an opportunity? Is this something that you would want to see where we saw the number of months that Andy showed under that phasing plan that we have currently? Is that something that could be accelerated where, as Andy mentioned, we look at the safety as a number 1 priority. So if there's a safety concern that's out there and we find any support of that, that comes forward for implementation. It doesn't require a whole lot of other feedback, if you will. Yet, if it's not, and let's say you've got multiple neighborhoods that are asking for roundabouts, they're asking for bulb outs, they're really asking for a lot of what we touted now as phase 3 capital type of improvements. Maybe we bring you a summary of what you reviewed in the prior 8 or 9 months from the prior year of what traffic calming measures these neighborhoods or these communities, these locations have basically asked for, and you prioritize from a public works commission what you believe are the higher priority to the lower priority. And I'm going to be very, very hypothetical here, and I'm not recommending in any way to direct it, but just seeding you with ideas. We went through the Fremona neighborhood. We contemplated the mini roundabouts, temporary or otherwise. That was a neighborhood approach, and that is something that we're very supportive of. We don't like to consider one intersection at a time for things of that nature. But let's assume that was asked for. We had basically a street or a few locations in each of the districts in the vast looking at these mini roundabouts. Rather than them being defined by district, when we bring matters to you as a commission, we could be making the recommendations of the least intrusive to the most intrusive type of improvements. And let's call the phase 3 the most intrusive, where in April, when we come to you asking for input on the capital budget or the operating budget, we bring back all the recommendations that were supported by the commission and have you identify them as a priority and as a recommendation list for the council to consider as part of that budget. So that way they're setting a budget for the following year to implement those type of phase 3 improvements and anything else that may come up in the process. That was a primary thought that I had, giving you an opportunity to not just do them one time, but also then collectively looking at them as you make recommendations to the city council in the springtime.
Okay.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you.
So I guess that gives me a good idea on how to finish this motion here. Okay, so receive and file, and then instead of like phase 1, if it doesn't work, you go to phase 2, and then if that doesn't work, you go to phase 3. Like Commissioner Min was saying, yeah, basically say that the phases can be interchangeable. And so that would be how I would finish the motion, I guess. And then, and then what Ted was saying, when it comes back for budget, yeah, we can recommend either phase 3 starting, we have the ability to say phase 3 is the beginning phase for that project instead of starting with phase 1, something like that. Is that what I'm hearing?
I wouldn't use the term interchangeable, maybe a term like flexible would be better.
It's almost like they're level 1, 2, and 3 solutions.
Yeah, they're not in phase 1. I mean, you don't have to go to phase 1 to get to phase 2. You can start with, they're interchangeable as far as what would be phase 1. But the elements that are in those phases can be interchanged basically.
Director Simon, you have your hand up.
My apologies, I left it up from before. I'll lower it.
Commissioner Glass, you have your hand up.
Okay, yeah, and I like the term flexible, but remember that these are tools. Each of these options in phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 are just tools, as Gene used to say, that are used to solve the problem. So let's come up with a process that recognizes these as tools where we get a problem and we choose what the appropriate tools are for, maybe trying to solve it first as easily as possible, as cheaply as possible. And then if that doesn't work, moving on to another tool.
Yeah, I believe the phasing as presented is what you said at first, but yeah, if we decide to go big at first, we can start with phase 3, and that would be the interchangeability about the phases, so that one's not dependent on the other. and it would be up to, I guess, the budget, available budget and recommendation from staff if we can, go big up front or not, based on the project and budget.
Okay, I'm going to suggest that we haven't seen a second for the motion, so perhaps we'd like to rephrase it and make sure we've got what we want.
It started out easy.
Another go there, Commissioner Garcia.
Okay, adopt and let's see, what do you call it? Receive and file the report. And that the phases be interchangeable and not necessarily 1, 2, and 3, but maybe like Commissioner Glass said, some toolbox suggestions. And then, that's it. And then, that would be.
Let me see if I can repeat the motion. We receive and file, and that instead of going chronologically from phase 1 to 2 to 3, we can pick and choose as deemed appropriate.
Correct.
Mhm.
Does that make sense, Andy?
Yeah, I think so. I'm just hearing you want to disconnect the chronology, right? So I think appropriate was used, or fitting maybe is a good word. And that will be according to the traffic engineer's judgments, and certainly with input from the resident or residents, group of residents that bring the concern forward. One of the advantages of the kind of holistic approach that we learned in process is that a resident comes forward with their own solution, which may not be the most appropriate solution, rather than coming forward with a problem and taking the time to sort out what the root cause was of their concern, seemed to yield better results than just jumping into the solution that they were thinking would be the correct approach. So we're hearing not being locked into the sequence and being able to use professional judgment to select from the various categories. And I think maybe we get rid of the word phase, which connotes a sequence, and maybe go to level, as somebody had suggested, to be able to choose from a level this or that, depending on the issue. So I hear that. If that's what the intent is, then it's, well.
Yeah, that was articulated much better.
Commissioner Funabashi, you have your hand up?
I do, thank you. And I kind of want to echo some of the sentiments from the commission to staff. I mean, I think it's wonderful. We see very clearly what the 3 phases are. They're very definable, and I appreciate how it starts off. And then if it doesn't meet its goal, I was very mindful of listening to that a key part of this is staffing levels and the ability to implement things quickly. Those of us who have been on the commission for a while, we know one of the big pet peeves amongst the holistic approach, which I still think is the best, is how long it has taken at times from that initial contact. And obviously there's a process in terms of, what the citizenry in that given neighborhood collecting. We task them with collecting their own signatures and coming back to us. So we know that exercise is done as well. What I do appreciate, though, as I recall many staff reports over the years, that even when we were deciding on a traffic calming issue on one particular block, that the tools available to us in that very first presentation to us as a commission included items that were obviously on phase 1, but many times there were phase 2 items on that suggested list right out of the gate as well. My general sense is that, and we've heard this many times, obviously things have changed greatly when we used to have public testimony and, 10, 20, some odd neighbors come in and each speak to us, with 3 minutes. They would generally lean towards a 4-way stop sign or a speed hump, right? So when we started learning about bulb outs and all these different other tools that were available to us, we we had other things that we could look at. And of course, in the back of my mind, and I think you guys might have been there as well, I was always thinking of the economical way. How can we kind of hopefully solve some of it by very simply, simple, inexpensive measures, the edge striping, the things like this. And totally, I understand that some of the stuff, when we jump to other tools in the box, it's going to cost more money and take more time because it involves engineering. We can't just paint, not every line can be painted where we want to put it. Obviously, it's got to be engineered and spacing and measurements and all that. So there's more staff time. So having said all that, again, I'm just acknowledging that from my perspective, over the years, we've always gotten items from phase 2 and phase 1 when we were looking at that, at a specific block or intersection or street. So I would ask staff to continue that. They've always felt confident enough to give us, some of the top 5, 6, 7, 8, sometimes 10 different things we could pick from. And having been on the commission with many of you, we would often, deliberate back and forth. Like, one commissioner wanted these 4 items, another commissioner was really hot on these 2. And we'd always kind of come up with like 6 or, whatever through our own commission's deliberations. I'd like to see that continue as well. If there's anything maybe to express back in response to tonight's presentation, it's that while I appreciate the 3-phase approach, that we realize that it's a guideline that is flexible. And I know another commissioner said that tonight. I think it was Commissioner Glass said, these need to be flexible. And so I would only add to whatever motion of receive and file that we put an emphasis on being flexible to be able to come up with our own hybrids of phase 1 and 2 right out of the gate if we choose to on a traffic calming where a traffic circle would not be appropriate. I think my big takeaway tonight is, and we do know, and it was said earlier, when it comes to traffic circles, that is the bar is go big or go home. We have learned, albeit a bit of the hard way. Yeah. We've taken gruff in the ear. Mayor and council has taken gruff, because of how they look. We've got all the good empirical data, but we really should be looking probably more specifically at those intersections that are going to be high profile and really focus on those. I mean, Pomona was a great example of how to put 3 in a row, but it was just in one given neighborhood. So maybe it didn't have, we didn't have the ability. And again, this is probably where it is going to go to mayor and council when it's such a big ticket item, because you remember, guys, even bulb outs are not cheap, right? That's an expensive tool. And so, we want to kind of save those, for like Torrance and Broadway, obviously the high profile intersection. But I think as a commission, we have that leeway to do that. Obviously, from the holistic approach, we're going to get a lot of community members, and perhaps we'll be meeting in person and hearing personal testimony at some point in the not too distant future. Those are going to be funny rank and file intersections and blocks in my neighborhood and all of your neighborhoods that maybe not be as high profile, but still need the traffic calming. So having said all that, that's really just kind of echoing some of the sentiments that all of you expressed already. I think, but basically, using the keyword of flexible, being able to come up with hybrid solutions between phase 1 and 2 right out of the gate. And that if we do any more traffic circles, that should be where we put a little more time and effort and maybe go to the phase 3. And but we would always obviously look to staff to say, wow, this is a high profile intersection. And I have every confidence that staff will suggest to us a phase 3 solution, for those intersections that really warrant it. And that's kind of what we look to staff to do, with the ability to do our own deliberations through the process. So anyway, Daniel, I think you have a great motion. I would second it as you presented it. Basically, if I understand it right, it's a receive and file with the flexibility that we aren't totally beholden to phase 1, 2, and 3, although it's always there, but that staff will present to us tools, to use another commissioner's word, from from the first phase or the second phase, and maybe even some third phase stuff when it comes to those administrative reports for what we'll look at in the future.
Yeah, I think
that's exactly what was the motion, and you seconded it, I believe, right?
I second it. Okay. Thank you for listening.
Is there
And
any
I do
more
incorporate Funabashi's, Commissioner Funabashi's comments regarding flexible and guideline for the phases.
I'm sorry, say that again?
Yeah, basically the phases are really guidelines and that we have the flexibility to interchange them. Like Commissioner Glass was saying, flexible. So
Right. Well, that was your motion. He has seconded it. I guess I should call for a roll call vote.
Lauren, I'm sure you've checked just any e-comments. Wanted to make sure we cleared.
Oh, I'm terribly sorry. Do we have any e-comments? We don't. I don't believe we've got any anyone watching us that's commenting. But e-comments.
There are
Just a reminder.
comments. So we'll go to the roll call vote. Commissioner Arata?
May I ask a question? May I ask a question? I just want to know maybe some light or thoughts. Like I'm new to the commission, as you all know, of why they set the phases up the way that they did, and their thoughts behind leaving it the way that they have. Or at least the phases, and what to do and what not to do, and the timeline.
The way I understood it was the 3-phase system, which they had, was actually a little bit of a lengthier process, and sometimes can be more of a resource intensive process for staff, where I think the idea of the proposals we're trying to make is to A, provide the staff with more flexibility, and B, potentially reducing the overall timeline for deployment. And lastly, to just sort of make it as efficient as possible with their own resource, resource allocation.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner.
No, I understand. Yeah, I understand that. I guess my question, let me reiterate, is like, when did they do the phases, or how long ago?
My recollection was this was done about 4 years ago, wasn't it? It was an attempt to try and come up with a plan to go through this. And as I understand it, what we've seen is that we think the plan could be tweaked so that we would be able to use the different tools that are now separated by the different state phases, and it would be then enable things to be done faster is the hope. And that's what the motion says.
I understand. Who set the phases the way they are? Is that something that Public Works recommended to the mayor? How did
it came out of I think a public workshop and several discussions at the Public Works Commission meetings. Am I recalling that right, Andy?
My recollection is what I put on the screen predated the 2018 discussions, and the 2018 discussions were an attempt like this one to formally adopt something different, which I think was, choosing my words carefully here, maybe harder to digest than what we currently had with the it was an attempt to shorten the process, but it was hard to consume. I think somebody used that word before. It was hard to understand, hard to figure out where you were in the process. So, Commissioner Arata, if I understand your question, the kind of the adopted phase, and Ted, you might have to help me here if you have some memory that precedes my time here in the city, but it was a policy adopted by the city council to implement or to give staff direction on how to implement the various requests that came in. And it seemed to be based on economics and choosing an approach that was iterative and tested the easy, inexpensive stuff first before we got into the more intrusive items. So I wasn't here then. I don't know, Ted, maybe it happened while you were here or prior to you. It was a different council than the current composition is, certainly. And so But I do believe it was the city council adopted policy at some point.
Yeah, and Andy, if I
Thank
can
you
add,
so much.
you're absolutely right. This is something that preceded both of us at the city from a direction. I just recall when I started with the city, Jack Rydell was here as our city traffic engineer. Essentially, Gene was hired on a little bit after as an associate to help him with those. Prior to them both coming in, all I recall or heard from prior documentation is it was either speed cushions or stop signs. There wasn't this openness to all these other traffic calming tools that are in the toolbox for a variety of implementations. And both Jack and Gene consulted with me. We sort of discussed this, and I was very open to any of the tools that are in that toolbox to say, yeah, let's bring those forward and see where we can go. It's not just a stop sign, speed cushion type of implementation. We should be open to any of these other ideas. And I think that's when it became a little bit more critical in terms of conversations, because speed cushions, they would get a traffic calming budget. It would be, certain number of dollars per year, and the council would approve them for installation, and off they went. Stop signs are non-capital. They're really not a significant cost ticket item, and they were much, much easier to implement. When we got into the more, we call them intrusive, but actually more capital costing items such as roundabouts, bulb outs, etc. Yes, that openness to ideas started to make the process a little bit clunkier, a little bit lengthier. And I think what we're asking now is, give us your recommendations to try to shorten that up, because we'd love to be able to bring these forward without having to go through months and months of iterative discussions and reiterations.
And I think that's what this motion that's before us does. I mean, it gives you a little more flexibility, and I think that's the key recommendation here, is to be willing to move more quickly to some of the things that are in phase 2 or in phase 3 when it's deemed appropriate. And that's exactly, I think, flexibility will give you a little more speed, and that's what the city council is looking for in its strategic plan. And we think tweaking this policy that we had does that, and that's what this motion does. So without further discussion, can we have a roll call vote in favor of the motion?
Sure, thank you. I appreciate that clarification. And I think that she asked me, I'll say aye.
Commissioner Glass? Can you repeat that? It just kind of cut out.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Garcia?
Yes.
Commissioner Funabashi?
Yes.
Commissioner Bajesh?
Yes.
Vice Chairman?
Yes.
Chair Simpson?
Yes. Which I believe takes us now to item J3, discussion of mobility assessment and pedestrian movement in the Riviera Village. And I bet Andy's going to make that presentation.
Yeah, that's me again. You're going to be ready for a new traffic engineer. One of you guys might volunteer, actually. Not with me, but here we go.
Doing the recruiting here.
That's my real job.
Yeah. How
Okay.
many of you are traffic engineers? 3?
I'm sorry?
How many on the commission are traffic engineers?
I think
1, 2.
At least 2 of us, right?
Okay.
All right, let me jump into this last item here. And this is also an item that's driven by the strategic plan under the goal, invest in the city's infrastructure. The particular objective that was identified is to conduct a Riviera Village mobility assessment, focusing especially on pedestrian movement, and report back to the council also in April. We have been collecting data. We've actually hired somebody to collect some data for us. We're still in the process of analyzing that and coming up with the data-based recommendations. But we do have a number of ideas that we've considered just based on our own anecdotal information and lots of input from the council member from this district and other business development, that's not right, business improvement district in that area. So we do feel like we've got a pretty good list of items to consider here that might be looking at going forward. And I've listed a couple of different categories here of ideas. One are what I'm calling point locations or improvements at a particular geographic spot. And then the others would be more related to circulation and some potential changes there. And I'll just say from the onset that the circulation changes are really in draft form, and just want to make sure that that's clearly understood. We would need to do a lot more work before we brought these forward as a recommendation to the council, but we did want to kind of test the waters and see if these are things that the council would like us to pursue in the long run. So let me jump into a couple of these ideas here. Avenue I, and I guess if you are not familiar with Riviera Village, it is, or at least this process is kind of bounded. Catalina is the lifeline that runs through the middle of it, Catalina Avenue. Just to the east of that is the Triangle parking area, which is kind of surrounded on the south and east sides by Elena, and on the north side by Vista del Norte. And then one block further north of Vista del Norte is Avenue I, and where Avenue I meets Catalina is arguably kind of the northwest corner of the Riviera Village area. And then it goes south on Catalina to Palos Verdes Boulevard, and then out to essentially PCH and Palos Verdes Boulevard, although that's in the city of Torrance, most of that intersection. So that's kind of the area we're discussing. Might help. I can't share two screens at once, but if you wanted to pull up, for instance, the Google map just to familiarize yourself with the locations. Avenue I is has a mid-block crossing on it right now between Elena and Catalina Avenue. It's a long block. It's split with a crosswalk mid-block, which is typically something we don't like to do. People are used to crossing at corners, and the state code protects pedestrians crossing at corners, gives them the right of way in the middle of the block. There's, even if a crosswalk is there, drivers are typically not anticipating that and might not see even a well-painted crosswalk that's out there. So enhancements that we would be looking at to improve pedestrian movement there might be something like these in crosswalk signs here on the left side. This one looks like it's a temporary sign, but we could find permanent varieties to include. Again, just a visual cue to drivers that the crosswalk is coming up, and they should keep their eyes open for pedestrians making that crossing. A more bigger financial investment, certainly worth considering, are these in-road warning light systems. We shied away from, there's actually one there now, but it's an older technology that was hard to maintain and didn't last very long. Our understanding is the technology has improved dramatically in the last several years and is something we should consider again. Again, this is not a strength of mine, but we would certainly find people who could lead us in that direction. But this is a consideration for a mid-block crossing, both on the warning signs as well as in the pavement itself. So that's a concept at Avenue I. And I think it's right. Calaveras, that Mexican restaurant that's there, it's just to the west of that, if you're not familiar across this. I think it runs between this new steakhouse across the street, which I haven't been to yet, but that's the general area right there on Avenue I. Catalina, we have a number of intersections that a lot of things to think about, but bulb outs are a good solution for a number of these intersections. The Avenue I Catalina intersection is skewed. It's not a 90-degree intersection. It makes it difficult to do a lot of things. A traffic circle has been suggested there on a number of occasions, but that's a difficult geometry without doing a lot of capital improvement at each of the corners. A bulb out might be a better solution there to shorten pedestrian crossings and provide some protection. And I've got a couple of photos here where the bulb out is done in concrete. in this lower right-hand corner photo, and then just above it, it's done in paint with bollards, which might be a good solution in that area, especially areas it's certainly cheaper to install. We do have an area like this in the bike corral that's down there. It's not an unfamiliar feel, although the bike corral is not a bulb out per se. It is kind of a protected area for pedestrians and people parking their bikes. So that's something that we could implement at some of those corners, some of those intersections. And then I know Jim Hannon's no longer on the commission, but he would be concerned about cycling traffic. So I just wanted to show this photo where it shows the bulb outs compatible with the class 2 bike lane here on this through street. So none of these intersections I'm speaking of are developed yet with the class 2 bike lane, but if Jim Hannon asks, tell him that I said we can do both at the same time, okay? So let me move on to the next area, Trader Joe's. In front of Trader Joe's, between Trader Joe's and the Triangle parking lot, a lot of pedestrians cross there. A lot of pedestrians cross everywhere along Vista del Norte. And so an idea here is to install what's called a speed table, which is different than a speed cushion or a speed hump or a speed bump. Again, this is my traffic engineer 101 explanation, but it is a traffic calming device in that it is a vertical deflection for vehicles. It slows traffic down, but it also concentrates, we would hope, crossing when it's painted as a crosswalk. And so I've got a couple examples shown here in a permanent installation, this one in brick. Most of them are probably in asphalt. The ones on the right side of the page are shown are rubberized. They're kind of a semi-permanent nature, something that could be installed and later picked up without too much trouble. So those are installations that are things that could be considered there. The advantage of this particular location in front of Trader Joe's is that there is a walkway through the middle of the triangle parking area that feeds right into this. So it acts kind of like a collector walkway as people come from their cars and get up off the parking lot surface and up onto a walking surface, and then would cross here at this location. It does cost us a parking spot on the Trader Joe's side, which would have to be replaced somewhere, but that would be part of our further work as we look into that. Here's an aerial depiction of what that might look like. Speed table is this black area here. And again, I apologize for the quality of this slide. This is doesn't come off well on the screen here probably, but maybe looks a little bit better in your package. But the thought would be that we would install the speed table here. Here's the walkway I was speaking about that runs through the parking lot. And then we would also enhance the crosswalks between, they cross these openings to the drive aisles for the parking lot. Just to provide some better pedestrian awareness and vehicle driver awareness of crossing.
Just for orientation, if I can interrupt, where is Trader Joe's?
Trader Joe's in this photo, this is the parking lot in front of Trader Joe's.
Yeah, okay.
In this corner here, yeah, thanks for the question. Okay, so that's an idea that's got some legs, at least with the council member from this district. So we will include this as an option and in our analysis of the data. We get into a little bit, I want to talk about circulation. So one of the ideas that would be compatible with the Trader Joe's elevator, the speed table elevator crosswalk is changing the traffic pattern on Avenida del Norte. I keep saying Vista del Norte, but I think it's Avenida del Norte, from Elena down to the El Prado. And that's just along the parking lot section where I'm showing in this yellow. This again is the Trader Joe's parking lot and building here. So changing the circulation for this to be one way in the westbound direction reduces the number of pedestrian conflicts as vehicles are only coming from one direction. Might be an opportunity to increase some parking along there if we can go to angled parking. And doesn't appear to, again, we haven't done formal studies on this, but doesn't appear to create big circulation issues for people leaving the parking lot or trying to make their way through the Riviera Village triangular section here. So that's a concept that we are considering and we'll be studying further, but taking to council just to kind of get a weather balloon view of do they like this idea or not. Something for us to pursue. Last one here, and please note that words draft written not right on the top of it is maybe my least baked idea that I'm presenting tonight. But this is a circulation change that would involve changing the flow on Catalina Avenue to northbound only between Elena and Avenida del Norte. And that provides advantages for, again, reduction of pedestrian and turning conflicts at the intersections. Also may create some more space for parking, especially if the thought among the council is to move forward with these, enhanced outdoor dining as we have now, which is only attached to the COVID emergency situation, but could be something the council looks at in the future. But it creates some space maybe for class 2 bike lanes in that area. And with the big caveat of we haven't really studied this in detail, seems to provide a good circulation pattern without too many negatives. We would also convert this other block on Avenida del Norte to be one way in the eastbound direction. And so I'm showing here the 2 lanes, two-way traffic on this other block of Avenida del Norte, just to understand that those aren't 2 ideas we're talking about marrying together, but individual ideas. So those are some of the ideas that we have brought forward or will be bringing forward next month to the City Council. Again, these are based largely on anecdotal data, on our own observations, our staff's observations, council member and others' observations who have a kind of big picture view on life in the Riviera Village. And we just like to kind of stimulate your thinking as well on maybe things that you've seen or observed or might work or might not work that we would take as part of our report next month when we go to the council.
Who is the councilman for that district? Is that?
That's Councilmember Nierenheim.
That's what I thought. So Commissioner Glass, you have your hand up.
I did. And I've got actually 2 points or 2 questions for Andy. One of them is the speed table. It appears to me that has an inherent advantage in that it basically has a walking surface that is level with the sidewalks. And therefore, from a handicap standpoint, it would be good for people who are handicapped, and maybe even we could get some funding from the federal government for that. The second item is, as you talk about, what to do with the various street areas between the businesses, what I think of is Pier Avenue in Hermosa Beach, between the water and what is it, Manhattan or Highland at that point? Anyway, it's a pedestrian mall. Also in Santa Monica. Have we given any thought to converting one of those streets to a partial pedestrian mall and do away with the one-way business, get the cars out of there, and then, if you do it over by the Trader Joe's in that area, then actually what you can do is increase the size of the parking lot. But I would actually pick more of the area over by Hennessy's and that area where you have all of the little restaurant bump outs, and say, let's just convert that chunk of street to a pedestrian mall. So that's my way of doing it.
Commissioner Garcia.
Yeah, I like Commissioner's Glass idea about the mall over there by Hennessy's. That's probably not a bad idea. But I like the speed table, coming out of Trader Joe's, because there's just a lot of pedestrians that do cross there, and there's nothing there right now. But you might lose a parking space, of course, when you put that in. But when you're driving out, I'm not sure if this would help slow down traffic as well. You know those or the traffic paddles? They're like about 2 feet, those plastic things on a plastic pole. Yeah, you might want to consider putting some of those so it's obvious, that crosswalk is there as well. So, just as an enhancement. But yeah, your bulb outs on I Street and Catalina also are a pretty good idea because, yeah, something needs to be done over there. I believe there was there's a lot of accidents because everybody's like walking from HT Grill and, going, I think a bus hit, an old couple, a few years back. So anyways, yeah, and it's kind of a dangerous intersection, believe it or not. So, but yeah, I like a lot of the ideas. Yeah, the one-way street down Via del Norte, I think you probably need to keep that a two-way because, a lot of people turning right out of Trader Joe's go, back to Catalina that way. And so, but the one-way, if you do go there instead of the pedestrian mall, that's something to look at as well. But yeah, I think I like the pedestrian mall better. But yeah, that's all I got to say.
Other comments? Yes, Commissioner Bajaj.
Yeah, I also like all of your pedestrian improvements. I think they're all valid and they're all, really good sort of thoughtful enhancements that, can make the community, that can really please the community and the council member and the bid. I have more concerns about the one-way conversions. I know you said that it's very conceptual and hasn't been really, delved into any more of like circulation pattern changes and so forth. But, that's where I think would just err on the side of caution with the large one-way, especially it could, increase a lot of circulation issues or increase volumes on, that one street that's just to the west, something de Costa. I forgot the name. It's
Camino de la Costa, perhaps.
Camino de la Costa. Yeah, it's all residential, multi-unit, and likely result in a lot more circulation on their streets and so forth. I think other than the one-way conversions, I really like the thought you put into all of the pedestrian improvements.
Commissioner Funabashi.
Thank you, Chair Simpson. I was just in the village last Friday for happy hour gathering my own intel and was crossing middle of the block on Catalina. There's a pretty decent crosswalk. It's kind of a three-way street onto Catalina, and our family optometrist is on Vista del Norte, just a little west of Trader Joe's. And so, kind of spent a little bit of time down there, but, this would not be the first body to bring up the idea of closing down Catalina. Even before COVID, there was always the conversation was how could we get to al fresco or outdoor dining? I mean, even before COVID, obviously the dining deck was something that Paul Hennessy did out in front of his restaurants a number of years ago, before it became a necessity for everyone. And I think now that we're moving away from COVID and what necessitated it originally, I think more and more of the restaurants are really wanting to formulate more of a dining, this dining deck program or parklets, what the different verbiage. So I think that's something that, obviously we need to get a little more buy-in from the Riviera Village Business Association, the RVA. They have the bid, they have their own business district and leadership there. Which should obviously be walking with us hand in hand, as far as all the different businesses and property owners and restaurateurs and whatnot. And obviously their input's going to be real critical. And we would want them obviously coming to whatever deliberations that we would participate in. We might have all the empirical data for one-way streets and everything, but I got to tell you, and I'm obviously big on the numbers, but that's such a radical change to the old village people who know those as two-way streets. So that's going to take a lot of education and a lot of hand-holding, in my humble opinion, to pull that off. It would almost be better to shut down Catalina completely and make it a pedestrian walk street than to try to do a one-way. Again, I'm anticipating a certain amount of resistance from the shopkeepers and the restaurateurs and the people down there. So we would really want to vet that big time in the community. The elevated crosswalk that serves as slowing everybody down, it's a bit intrusive, right? Because your car goes up and over and down, and however you feel about that, and the wear and tear on cars and whatnot. The crazy thing about that coming off the Triangle parking lot, and even Catalina, if you knew how much jaywalking goes on, I mean, people cross mid-street, in between the crosswalks. And I would obviously want to look at the cost comparison. I think lighting and signage, depending on how it pans out dollar-wise, might be better than because those elevated crosswalks, the tables, they look kind of funky too, and there's, obviously to be something that we talk about some more before, obviously we made a suggestion as a commission, but just some initial thoughts off my top of my head in terms of, still making attractive crosswalks in those key areas, especially coming off the Triangle parking lot. And in fact, I know another big issue, which wasn't really mentioned, is parking. A lot of that is coastal commission stuff. We can't give up one parking space, I think, without coming up with a space somewhere else. And I've even thought at some point that we, depending on, it's interesting. You go to the Triangle parking lot. If you got to go to the bank on the west side, middle of the week, there's plenty of spaces. But then you come at different times on the weekend, and it's much harder. So I even thought we might even need to do an assessment on what the real parking needs are. Do we need to take that Triangle parking lot and create an elevated section, another deck for more parking? I'm not saying that we do, but obviously a parking study would determine whether or not we need to go down that avenue. But going back to the closing down of streets and whatnot, the village does that every Memorial Day weekend and Labor Day weekend and the holiday stroll. And I mean, that's literally, you guys have probably been to it. They literally shut down Catalina Avenue, and it's all, tents and booths and vendors and all this kind of stuff. And it's really, I think everybody loves that for those three key events throughout the year. So I think there's probably some data and some opinions from the business people and the residents down there as well. But I think that, that's certainly something to consider. Like I said, maybe turning it into something permanently, or dare I say, what would be our phase one or our phase two? Dare I say, start off with the initial barriers of how to shut down Catalina, let's say from Avenue I to Elena, and maybe even Vista de la Playa, or whatever that one, the street that has the median going through it. There's metered parking over at that end of Catalina as well. But all good stuff. I know obviously that that is obviously one of the great districts in our city, and I'd obviously like to look at Commissioner Garcia was brought up, that tragedy that happened with a bus. I'd like to know the Switters information as well. Obviously, that would be part of what we would be looking at before, as part of our deliberations to come up with different things. But I like that we're focusing on it. That's great. So anyway, that's my thoughts. Thank you.
Other comments? Okay, then I'll offer a few. I think that's a very thorough, thoughtful presentation. I think that you still you need to do and intend to do, as I understand it, a closer study of the implications of making some of those streets one-way streets. And I think I like the way that looked, but I think you need to look at the real traffic data and the implications of that. Commissioner Funabashi's suggestion about the possibility of increasing the parking capability with a parking structure, I've heard that mentioned before in other contexts. I think that's something well worth looking into, although that wasn't part of this. I also think that rather than having the one-way street on Catalina, that the way to go is definitely to make that a plaza, just like Pier Plaza in Hermosa Beach. And that would be, I think, a very useful addition. Other comments? Seeing none, do we have some motion that someone would like to make? I gather you're going to be presenting this, we should receive and file, and you'll also be presenting this to the city council as a preliminary proposal. Is that what you're calling it?
That is, and some of these ideas are less preliminary than others. For instance, at Elena and Catalina, we already have a design started for a bulb out or a finger or something there to help the crossing from that kind of northwest corner directly across the street. So we do have some of these things in motion. That's by other council action, but these other topics would be added to the list either as a less expensive enhancement through bollards and paint, for instance, for the bulb outs, or maybe something more permanent in terms of the concrete work, the civil work. Just to reflect back on one of the comments I heard, there has been a parking analysis done of turning the triangle parking lot into I think it was 3-level structure. Lauren knows something about that. It was funded by the city, or at least in part by the city, I think. And but the Riviera bid did that analysis, and it's in the tens of millions of dollars category to do that. So council has that information if they want to go that direction, and that certainly could be something that you guys as a commission might want to support or suggest that they pursue further or something. So I'm not saying that you do, I'm just saying that that study has been done and that information is available.
So what sort of motion would someone like to be making? If someone would like to be making a motion.
You have to go to public comment first, or?
Oh, apologies. Is there any public comment? You would think I'd learn that. I guess there is none.
There's no public comments.
So, anyone got a particular motion that's starting to crystallize?
I have a comment and a question. So
Yes.
I was just down in the Riviera with my son. We were having pizza and we're sitting outside of Redondo, and I was like, there's so much traffic on that street. Where did you say you would be, if let's say they did the mall, where would they route the traffic from Catalina?
It would just be speculative for me to say at this point. A lot of the traffic.
Not yet.
Yeah, we haven't done those studies, but Elena seems like an obvious choice to me, where the grade's a little bit much to make it a comfortable pedestrian plaza. That's my opinion. And the other side, I don't know if Avenue I is the right answer or if Avenida del Norte is the right answer, but somewhere in that neighborhood, I would think.
I was surprised how many cars.
That's just my speculation. I just want to be sure you hear that. We haven't looked at this any more than just anecdotally. And
Sure. Is there any way? Is this something that when would you present it to City Council? Is this something that can come back to us?
so our effort in April will be to present some of these ideas founded on our data that we've collected and we'll have analyzed by that point, and ask for direction from them on how to pursue this. They may tell us to study it more or come up with a comprehensive design, or they may just tell us to install bulb outs at intersection A, B, and C. Hard to predict what they'll say. Ted, do you have any idea? You've probably heard more from Council Member Ehrenheim than I have on this.
Yeah, no, idea-wise, we're planning to go April the 19th. That's the plan at this particular point, as Andy mentioned. We're going to be presenting these ideas, and Chairperson Simpson, that's also something that we're looking for the commission, is not just receive and file, but if you're supportive of these ideas, I think it will be great to let us know. And if there's any component that you're not supportive of, and I'm going to mention one from my perspective, because Andy mentioned the word draft. Commissioner Arata talked about the volume of traffic on Catalina. That's why we wrote the letter draft. There's a lot of data that has to be analyzed. Catalina is one of our more major streets out there. It carries a large volume of vehicles. It's crucial in the circulation in and through the village itself. But we just wanted to introduce it because it was something that was asked about in the past. But vehicular volume circulation is key. It is the key north-south, I'll call it, it's not an arterial, it's a collector roadway, if that's the right word. In this particular segment, it does carry a lot of traffic. Camino de la Costa and Esplanade are really not good alternatives for that in order to do so. And the word about this being in the coastal zone, it is in the coastal zone. That's a significant amount of parking that we have on Catalina that would have to be offset. But about the only way you can offset that level of parking is to go with a multi-level parking structure. It can't be a 1 or 2 spaces here. It's pretty significant in order to get to that point. So yes, Catalina is quite complex. On the other hand, Avenida del Norte, when we were looking at it for the first thought of the one-way circulation between Elena and the El Prado, we thought, well, that's the triangle parking lot. It has the ability to circulate very, very well with that potential one-way circulation. And then coming in and out of those driveways, be it the Trader Joe's parking lot and or the businesses at the Village Runner or the others that are adjacent to it, those could very easily make a right turn out, again, reduce the potential conflicts with vehicles and pedestrians, and circulate not only through the triangle parking lot, but also circulate anywhere they want via El Prado, continue down to Catalina, etc. We're really here to whet your appetite and sort of get your feedback on it. We knew Catalina has a lot of challenges, which is why Andy presented it in the way that he did, and especially had the watermark on it that said draft all across the slide, because it does have a lot of elements to be considered. I'm hoping that answered your question, Commissioner Arada.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Ted.
So, do we have anyone who would care to make a motion?
There you go.
Commissioner Funabashi, you got your 10 minutes.
I'll jump in, and I'm totally open-minded, but you know, I was certainly noted that the first opening of this last presentation was the crosswalks, and so I think that pedestrian safety is our first and foremost drive, I think, right now. And so, in addition to receive and file, I think that suggestions for modification and improvement to these key crosswalks that we're talking about, whether it's Midspan Avenue I and mid-block Avenue I and mid-block Vista del Norte. I got to tell you, I mean, all the draft circulations and those different things, and even what I was talking about earlier about closing down Catalina, I'm not suggesting that. I'm suggesting that we explore it further, obviously, and even really gather more feedback from the community that's in that area. But from my comfortable perspective on this commission, I'd say a receive and file with, again, an emphasis to enhancing and improving the key crosswalks as brought part of the presentation tonight.
Would you be amenable to adding to that and study the possibility and further study the implications of changing traffic circulation and possibly making a plaza out of Catalina?
Absolutely, to add the exploration of those. Without, I mean, unless there was a majority of you that said, I want that to be shut down, or I want that to be a one-way street. Unless there was any of you that, I'm not getting that sentiment from our group.
I think we think it's an
explore
idea, but it clearly needs further explanation. In fact, you suggested that, Andy, when you brought it in as a draft. So,
yep.
So,
yeah, I like that wording. I'll second that.
Okay. I guess.
Could I ask for clarity's sake,
Yes.
Commissioner
Yes, please.
Rashi, did you mean when you said the key crosswalks, were you talking just the two, or were you also talking about the intersections along Catalina?
Well, I think there were two that you had mentioned mid-block there at Calaveras and the I can't remember the steak restaurant across there. Mid-block Avenue I and mid-block Vista del Norte, right, coming off of the Triangle parking lot at Trader Joe's.
And wasn't there one at Catalina too?
Well, here's the thing that, you know, if you go to Catalina, and I want to say, what's the block by Coffee Cartel? It's back close towards PV Boulevard. That's, you know, where you start to go up. Is that what it is? Yeah. You start to go up the incline. Catalina starts to incline a bit. Because of the parking construction, pedestrians have to walk in to about the width of a car. So a bulb out probably there would be pretty good. But again, I think were we not losing a parking space when we do bulb outs? So I didn't want to include that until the further study was done. So yes, my motion would be for those two key, but also as part of that motion that explores traffic circulation. Before that, we would say that explores improving other key crossing areas and traffic circulation and the potential for closing Catalina to be a pedestrian-only street.
Thank you.
Okay.
Got it.
And you're seconding that, right, Commissioner
Yes,
Garcia?
yes.
Okay, so we look around and see, do we have any public comment? I would be shocked if we did, but maybe somebody joined us. I finally learned to ask for that. So now I ask for a roll call vote, please.
Okay, so there's no public comment and no e-comments at this time. So for the roll call vote, we've got Commissioner Arata.
Yes. Can you repeat the motion again, please?
Maybe.
The motion.
Rashi, do you want to do that, or would you like me to try it?
You know, I didn't write it down, but
Okay.
did you write it down?
I made some notes.
Okay.
Tell me if I'm wrong, but as
That'll
I
be good.
I wrote it down, it would be to receive and file, and then support especially the two mid-block crossings with options for the speed table or you said this in your earlier comments, I assume it's what you meant, or for some other enhancement, maybe not the speed table per se.
Yes, for those the two that you identified.
For those two, and then further study to look at other important crossings, particularly along Catalina, and to further study the circulation issues that we brought up or other possibilities to enhance circulation.
And also the possibility of making a plaza on Catalina.
Probably good to emphasize that as well, because that's a biggie, but I think, you know, unless anyone's really objecting, again, it's an exploration,
Yeah.
and we're not the
Why don't we
first
start
ones,
calling that the Redondo Promenade?
because somebody will think it's Santa Monica and shoot it down.
Well, but at least it gives the image.
So we'll do naming rights at the next meeting.
We've got,
Right. What do we call it? Crypto, whatever.
We've got one vote in favor, and you're calling the rest of the roll, I believe.
Okay. Commissioner Glass,
Yes.
Commissioner Garcia,
Yes,
Commissioner Funabashi,
Yes.
Commissioner Bajaj,
Yes.
Vice Chair,
Yes.
Chair Simpson.
Yes.
Thank you.
So let me see now. We're now at that point where we enjoy it with the referrals to staff. So let's start with Commissioner Glass.
Well, earlier this week, I attended a meeting in District 5, which was attended actually where our new police chief spoke, Chief Hoffman. And among the many issues that he has inherited is the problem of the non-automotive vehicles that are out there proliferating, scooters, and electric bikes and bikes themselves, and how, you know, the users of those vehicles are basically ignoring all road rules.
That seems to be true.
Okay? And I've raised this issue in the past about bikes, but it's getting worse, and he says it's getting worse from his standpoint too. I would like to know, where does the funding come from for all of the bike lanes and things like that? Does it come by any chance from our car registration taxes? Because I'm beginning to feel that maybe we ought to start registering bikes and e-bikes and scooters and collecting an annual fee on them to pay for all this stuff we're doing for them.
To answer that, the short answer is the city of Redondo Beach's funding for bike enhancements typically is from grant funding through Metro, which
Okay.
I'm sure Measure M. Well, we currently have an old call for projects project on the books, which I don't know what the source of that particular funding was. Ted, maybe you know what the CIP funds were. Maybe they were federal.
Yeah, I believe it was MAT funding, federal money that's coming through Caltrans.
We also have some other grants funding and Measure M funding that is through the Metro funding. Measure M is a sales tax item for LA County.
Okay. Also, how much of a problem would it be? I've seen, you know, on the bike path, little signs of a bike. They're about, 6 inches by 2 or 3 inches, and they have an image of a bike saying, you know, that basically tells you this is a bike path. How much of an effort would it be to put those on each and every stop sign? Just below the stop sign to indicate that bikes have to follow the rules. I know you don't like that, Ted.
I'm shaking my head, Andy, and I'll answer that one. You know, those signs are indicative. They are, they're designating a bike facility, whether that be a class 3 or class 2. They're not intended to be combined with stop signs. Stop signs are universal. They are the same sign for both bicyclists and automobiles. So no, you don't re-emphasize to the bicyclist that the stop sign.
How do we get the message across before we wind up with some dead bicyclists run over by cars?
If I can interject here, this may be something that should be referred to the police department. They've got to be out there stopping these foolish kids blasting through stop signs and giving them tickets.
They don't have enough people to do what is necessary. You know, they got a staff of 100 people spread over 3 shifts and spread over the entire city. So anyway, it's one of my sore points. So sorry, guys.
Other referrals to staff? I see none. I have one. There is a newly added small, very small dog park in Andrews Park, which is very close to where I live. I occasionally take my dog down there. It's been open now, all of about 2 or 3 months. It looks as though there is some sort of water line, irrigation line in that area that's broken or something, because every couple of days it seems like there's much more water in that dog park than should be there. So I don't know if that's worth looking at. The other aspect of that too is I had heard that there were going to be wood chips put in there. Right now it's just kind of dirt, and on a day like today it turns to mud. And I'm just curious whether that's going to be happening. The other thing that I think, Ted, you said was in the works, some kind of a look at some of the left turn lanes, like at Ringe on Artesia Boulevard. Is that progressing and reassessing those?
Yes, if you're pausing at the 3 requests, the answer is yes. Okay. For the water, we'll have our parks people look and see if there are any damages to the irrigation system. If you're seeing any concentration of water at any one spot,
Yeah,
we'll have that
it looks at
investigated.
one spot, it's looking like it's coming up out of some broken pipe or something.
Okay, we'll definitely get that repaired if that's the case. As far as the chipping or the adding the wood chip or the bark out there, yes, that's something that's being coordinated with the council member for that district. Councilman Abaji would like to have a community event out there when he does that. So that is being coordinated. And yes, we are looking to get into the design of those left turn pocket modifications along Artesia.
Any other, yes, I see Commissioner Garcia.
Yeah, I have one that I finally remembered. When, on Catalina, when you're going northbound, I think it's the street where Esplanade runs into it, but on the east side of Catalina, there's a catch basin that's kind of offset. So when you're trying to make a right, you really can't, because it's the catch basin's kind of low, but then there's a pipe that you have to drive over. And so anyways, yeah, I think you probably need to repair that catch basin or something so that way drivers can, make a right over there. And even if it's clear, you can't make a right because of the bump. It's kind of offset by, I don't know, 4 to 6 inches, something like that.
Commissioner Garcia, if you can let us know exactly which intersection you're looking at, we can definitely investigate that.
Yeah, it's not Esplanade. On the other side of Esplanade, there's the name of that, whatever that street is.
Camino de la Costa?
It could be, yeah. I'll make sure. Yeah, I'll email you.
Yeah, that would be great, please.
Yeah. Okay.
Commissioner Funabashi, I see your hand.
Thank you. I know that the green belt is typically Edison first and foremost, and even I believe gas company has some stuff there too, but that we're tasked. I'll jump to it. Gophers. Are you guys aware of the proliferation of gophers that we have on the green belt in North Redondo? And I just never got around to actually seeing that, that staff's aware of it and what may or may not be being done right now. But I just thought I would bring that up.
Yep. Thank you, Commissioner Funabashi. Yes, we're very well aware. It is springtime. It is the time that the gophers are most active. And there is a variety of ways that our staff is trying to control the gophers out there.
I'll bring my dog out.
I don't need to know the means or the methods, just that you're on it. Thank you.
He goes crazy chasing little gophers. Commissioner Glass, you have your hand up again, I think. You're muted. Commissioner Glass, you're muted.
Commissioner Glass, you're muted. We can't hear you.
Okay, now you can hear my voice. Okay, put a dog park on the green way, and that'll take care of the gophers. Anyway, my real question involves the intersection at Inglewood and Manhattan Beach Boulevard, as well as the ongoing destruction of Manhattan Beach Boulevard between Inglewood and, let's say, Aviation. What's the status of what's going on?
That's a project that, the Inglewood and Manhattan Beach Hard Corner project is approaching its kickoff meeting in early April. That's the right turn lane, dedicated right turn lane in the southbound direction there. So that project is just ready to start. We had a long lead time with some equipment, traffic signal equipment there, but we've been anticipating that start date. I think it's April 10th. I'm not sure.
I noticed all those boxes are gone.
Yeah, a number of those were abandoned utilities that just needed to come out. And then the water, Metropolitan Water District had some facilities there that they relocated about a year ago to make room for our project. So we're getting real close to getting started on that one. And then Manhattan Beach Boulevard is in design. We had some requests to increase of design there. So that's taken some extra time to get.
What is the project that's going on? Is it Manhattan Beach's water or something like that that's made all the holes?
Well, there was a problem with the storm drain line that came from Northrop and connected to our storm drain at the intersection with Vale. Is that where you're talking about? So,
No, actually, it's further up, probably from Blossom to Aviation. They've been shutting down the westbound lanes, and digging big holes in the ground for weeks and shutting, making traffic a mess.
Was that gas company work? I'm thinking it was around.
I don't think so. I haven't seen the yellow tubing that the gas company usually does, but there is a facility on the corner that belongs to Manhattan Beach's water district, I think.
yeah, Lauren handles our permitting section. She'll probably know right away. Lauren, do you recall what's, not to put you on the spot or anything, Lauren?
There is a gas company project that's going on right now that does impact the intersection there of Manhattan Beach Boulevard and Aviation.
Hey,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's.
They've been at it for a couple of weeks now.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Any other referrals to staff? Seeing none. Oh, I see one. Commissioner Bajaj.
Not necessarily a referral, but just any updates on the city staff going back into the office. Is there any tentative date of when we will be doing these meetings back in person?
Ed may have something to add here, but we are commissioning our first meeting in the council chambers tomorrow night, is it, Ted?
Correct.
Live
It's a community workshop meeting. It's not.
Sorry.
An actual workshop meeting.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, community workshop meeting tomorrow night. I'm not sure if they've said exactly when the council and the commissions will begin meeting again.
Yeah, not yet. We're going to be discussing this back to in-person meetings on April the 19th, I believe. That's the scheduled date for the council to discuss that. And if the council supports it, we'll go through the training for staff on how to operate the new systems that are at the council chamber, and the commissions will be following suit as the city council also goes back. And as far as the city hall operations, we're fully open, fully functional. All of our counters are available. We're still encouraging people, to schedule meetings at the counters because it's been much more productive from the user's perspective as well as our staff perspective. But we're fully open at this point.
And you're recommending masks, right? Or is that?
They're recommended. They're not required.
That's what I thought. Yeah, same way the library up here, right? Any other? Commissioner Garcia, I see that.
Yeah. Before you close, I just want to say welcome to Lauren and the new commissioner, Arata, is it? Anyways, one of these days we'll see what you look like either in person or on video. But anyways, welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no more referrals to staff, would someone care to make a motion that we adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
Okay, Commissioner Bouchard.
I'll second.
Seconded by Commissioner Glass.
Just to note, Chair Simpson, you are adjourning to the next regularly scheduled meeting of this body, but it is a special meeting of the Budget and Finance Commission who will be joining you at that meeting at the onset.
Okay, so just to refresh my memory, we will be meeting a regular meeting of 7 o'clock. They probably will meet at 6 and then join us. Or
whatever we've done in the past,
I
yeah.
think that's what we've done, but whatever. And that presumably will be the only main topic then, the briefing on the budget?
Oh, we may bring other things to you. You did a great job tonight. We thought certainly want to bring more to you.
Okay. All right. So that was the motion to adjourn that we just received and got seconded. And all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? See you all in a month or so.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye all. Best to all of you. Good night.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.